Rina slid meat onto the pup's plate and prayed Bren wouldn't notice. The boy's fingers twitched toward the food, then froze as boots scraped behind her. She didn't turn yet, because fear wanted her small and silent, and Bren had spent years teaching her to obey it. Instead, she nudged the plate closer to the pup, making the choice with her own shaking hand. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Bootsteps halted just at her shoulder, close enough that she could feel his breath clip the back of her neck. The kitchen was a chaos of clattering pans, slamming oven doors, and shouted orders, but Bren's voice always cut through it all, sharp as a blade. "I said," he murmured, pitch low and dangerous. No seconds for the runt. Rina drew a breath that felt too big for her narrow chest and forced herself to straighten. "He's not a runt," she said. Her voice shook, but at least it existed. "He's just hungry." Across the scarred wooden table, the pup little Tomies, narrow shoulders swallowed by a tunic 2 sizes too big, stared at the meat as if it might vanish. His wolf scent was still faint, more promise than power, and bruises yellowed under his eyes where older boys had used him as sport. He shot Rina a quick, frantic glance, then ducked his head again, hands clenching in his lap to stop from reaching for the food lying right under his nose. "Hungry," Bren repeated, as if tasting the word. He took one slow, deliberate step closer. "And you decided the Alpha King's wedding feast was the perfect place to practice charity." The mention of the wedding slid under her skin like ice. Rina swallowed. "The sides of beef won't notice one missing slice," she said. "But he will." She nodded toward Tomies. "He hasn't eaten since yesterday." Wrong answer. Bren's end clamped around her elbow and yanked her away from the bench so fast her hip slammed into the table. Tomies jerked back, chair screeching. The plate wobbled, meat threatening to slide to the rush-strewn floor. Rina caught the edge of the table with her free hand, knuckles scraping wood. "Careful," she hissed before she could stop herself. You'll remember your place," Bren snapped. He was not yet 30, thick through the shoulders. His beta mark inked dark against the side of his neck. His wolf always rode close to the surface, a constant pressure in the air. He didn't need to raise his voice. His power did that for him. Rina kept her gaze fixed on the floor, counting the stains in the flagstones, because looking him in the eye only invited more trouble. "My place," she said softly, "is making sure no child in this pack goes hungry." Bren's fingers dug deeper into bone. Pain flared up Rina's arm, bright and hot. "Your place," he said, "is to do what you're told, especially today." His grip tightened with each word. Of all days, today. The word alone made her stomach twist. The entire stronghold of Greymere was buzzing like a kicked hive. The Alpha King's envoys had ridden in at dawn, banners snapping, armor bright. Somewhere beyond the kitchen walls, the great hall was being draped in silver and black, the air thick with preparations for a wedding no one believed in, and everyone feared. Her wedding. "Let go," she said quietly. It was barely more than breath, but she felt the words steady her spine. "You're hurting me." He shifted closer until his chest brushed her back. To the rest of the kitchen, they probably looked like nothing more than the beta correcting a disobedient servant. Only Rina felt the intent, the calculated pressure, the way he tilted his head so his lips were almost at her ear. "That's the idea," he murmured. "Do you think Aldric will be gentler when he finds out you can't even follow simple orders?" Aldric, the Alpha King of the Northlands. Her future husband, if the goddess didn't intervene between now and sunset. Rina's throat went dry. She pictured what she had heard in whispers. A man more wolf than human. A king with iron for blood. A beast who had never lost a challenge. They said his mere presence bent the air. that lesser wolves struggled to breathe when he entered a room. They also said he had demanded a bride, and hadn't cared which woman they sent, so long as the alliance was sealed. So they'd chosen her. "He won't care what you did to a kitchen girl," Rina said, hating the way her voice trembled on the last word. "He won't even know." Bren squeezed hard enough that stars sparked at the edges of her vision. "You're not just a kitchen girl anymore, Duckling," he said. "You're about to be our queen." The word landed with all the weight of a joke meant to wound. The entire kitchen had gone quiet now. The clatter and chatter smothered under a heavy blanket of listening. Rina could feel eyes on the back of her head, on the plain brown braid hanging between her shoulder blades, on the threadbare dress that had seen more soap water than any silk. "Queen," one of the scullery maids whispered near the hearth, the word edged in disbelief. "Ugly little thing like her." Heat scorched Rina's cheeks. Ugly little thing. She'd heard it all her life, sometimes whispered behind hands, sometimes spoken right to her face. Too thin. Too pale. Eyes too big. Mouth too stubborn. Hair the wrong shade of nothing. No amount of washing could scrub off the faint scar that curled from her left temple to her jaw like a mocking smile, a souvenir from the fire that had taken her parents and left her a charity case in her Uncle S. house. Ugly Duckling. Greymere had never let her forget it. "Please," Tomies whispered, so softly the word was almost swallowed by the crackle of the hearth. "Please, Beta. I won't ask again." Bren's attention snapped to the boy. His lip curled. "You won't ask at all," he said, and kicked the leg of Thomas's chair. The pup stumbled sideways, hands flying up instinctively. His fingers brushed the plate. The slice of meat slid off and hit the floor with a soft, wet slap. Something in Rina's chest snapped. Bren released her elbow, satisfied maybe that he'd reminded her of her place. As he turned toward the ovens, Rina moved. She stepped around him, muscles singing with a fear so bright it burned clean, and scooped the meat up from the floor before anyone could stop her. Grease and grit smeared her palm. She didn't care. She set the meat back on the plate in front of Tommy's. "Eat," she said softly. "Now." The kitchen held its breath. Tommy stared at her, eyes huge, at Bren, at the meat. His throat worked. Then, with a courage that made something sting behind Rina's eyes, he snatched up the slice and shoved it into his mouth as if he expected someone to rip it away. He chewed, tears spilling down his cheeks. That was all the time she had. Bren's hand came from nowhere, struck like a viper. Pain exploded along her cheekbone. The world tilted, then snapped sideways as her head cracked against the table's edge. She tasted iron. She didn't fall. Rina grabbed the side of the table and forced her knees to lock. Her Wolf small, quiet thing that it was whimpered inside her, pressing low against her ribs. The room swam for a heartbeat, faces smearing into one another. When it cleared, the kitchen was frozen. "Did you think?" Bren asked, his tone almost conversational. "That the Alpha King will thank you for disobeying your beta? For defiling his feast?" Rina forced herself to meet his gaze. His eyes were not cruel for cruelty's sake. They were calculating. He enjoyed the humiliation, but he also wanted something. Fear. Compliance. Evidence. "No," she said, and wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand. "I think he'll never hear about it." Her throat burned, but the rest came out anyway. "Unless you tell him you were beating his queen over a scrap of meat." Gasps fluttered around the kitchen like startled birds. Bren stilled. For a moment, the only sound was Thomas's panicked chewing and the hiss of boiling stew. Rina felt her heart pound against her ribs. That had been foolish. Reckless. She'd tugged the wolf's tail and didn't know yet if he would bite. Then Bren laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. Listen to her, he said, turning so the whole room could see the faint smear of blood on her lip. The bruise already blooming along her cheekbone. Already wearing her crown in that ugly little head. The word ugly struck harder than his hand. You'll do as you're told, Bren continued, stepping so close his breath washed over her face. You will walk into that hall tonight veiled and silent. You will kneel when you're supposed to kneel, speak when you're told to speak, and smile if anyone's stupid enough to look carefully at you. He leaned in until his nose almost brushed the faint curve of her scar. And if Aldric rejects you, Duckling, you'll crawl back here and thank me for reminding you you're nothing. Rina's fingers curled so tight her blunt nails bit into her palms. For one wild heartbeat she imagined her wolf rising, teeth bared, smashing her forehead into his nose, watching him stagger. But her vulf only shivered. It had never been strong, never loud. Just a dull, persistent ache under her skin. A reminder that she was half of something she might never fully become. So she did what she'd learned to do. She swallowed the fire, let it settle into a slow, smoldering burn. If he rejects me, she said steadily, you'll have bigger problems than me. Bren, this alliance is the only thing keeping Aldric's armies from our borders. He went very still. Truth, she had discovered, was another kind of weapon. It just didn't draw blood as quickly. Bren's jaw flexed, a muscle jumping near his temple. Then, slowly, he stepped back. Get your face cleaned up, he said. The king's envoys want to see what we're sending them. His gaze raked her from head to toe, dismissive, though I'm not sure why. He turned away, barking orders. The noise of the kitchen slowly returned, though it came back wrong, edged, and off balance. No one met Rina's eyes. Tommy swallowed the last of the meat, chest heaving, and scrubbed his sleeve across his mouth. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't mean. You did nothing wrong, Rina said firmly. She reached out, fingers gentle, and brushed his tangled hair back from his forehead. Don't ever apologize for being hungry. He nodded, but his eyes said he would apologize for this for a very long time. Rina straightened, every bone in her body protesting. She could feel the bruise swelling under her skin, heat pulsing with her heartbeat. It would show. That was the trouble. They could powder and paint her all they liked. The Alpha King's envoys would see exactly how Greymere treated the bride they were sending. Maybe that was the point. The mirror in her tiny chamber was cracked, a spiderweb shattering her reflection into uneven pieces. Rina dabbed at her cheek with a damp cloth, wincing when the fabric dragged over split skin. Hold still, Mera muttered around a mouthful of pins. Her cousin's fingers were quick and competent as she twisted Rina's hair into something that might pass for formal, threading dull silver ribbon through the dark strands. Mera had the same high cheekbones and tilted eyes Rina remembered from childhood, but where Mera's were framed in glossy curls and perfect skin, Rina's face looked like it had been sketched in haste and smudged. I'm trying, Rina said. It hurts. You poked the wolf, Mera said, not unkindly. You knew he'd bite. Rina's jaw clenched. He's not a wolf, he's a bully. That's not the same thing. Mera snorted softly, fingers never pausing. Bullying is just what wolves do when no one's watching. Look up. Rina lifted her gaze. Her reflection stared back at her from a dozen fractured angles. The bruise on her cheek had darkened to an ugly purple shadow. Mera clicked her tongue. Bren's going to answer for that, she said. Rina blinked. To who? She asked. Uncle? He won't care. Not if Bren says I provoked him. Mera didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached for a small pot on the washstand and began tapping powder over the swelling. Not to your uncle, she said eventually. To the king. If he ever meets you without that damn veil, He'll want to know why the bride sent to his court looks like she lost a fight with a door frame. The king doesn't care what I look like, Rina said, and couldn't quite keep the bitterness from her tone. He made that perfectly clear in his terms. Any fertile female of suitable lineage, wasn't that the phrasing? Mera made a face. You remember too many things. Rina did. The old Alpha's study smelled of ink and leather and dust the night they read Aldric's letter aloud, the parchment heavy with a seal that gleamed like fresh blood. She remembered every word, every phrase that reduced her to a line item on a treaty. One unwed female of the Greymere line, to wed King Aldric Vereen of the Northlands. In exchange, peace, shared borders, trade rights, a promise that Aldric's armies would not march on Greymere lands for as long as the marriage endured. They turned then, all at once, to look at her. Rina, the plain one, the quiet one, the one whose parents were already dead, whose absence would cause the fewest ripples. She'd felt the decision land on her like a cloak she had no strength to shrug off. There, Mera said now, stepping back. Better. Rina studied the patchwork version of herself. The powder dulled the bruise, though it couldn't hide the swelling completely. Her dark eyes looked larger than ever, shadowed by sleeplessness. Her mouth, to her irritation, still wanted to soften into a hopeful line. Hope is for fools, she reminded herself, or for people whose lives hadn't been bartered away to a man they'd never met. Stop looking like you're going to your execution, Mera said, reading her thoughts too easily. It's a wedding. To a stranger who thinks fertile female is a reasonable way to describe a person. Rina said dryly. A powerful stranger, Mera countered. Who might be handsome and rich. Rina gave her a look. Mera sighed, hands settling on Rina's shoulders. All right. Fine. He might be a monster, but he's a monster who didn't march on us when he could have. And that matters. I know, Rina said. She did. Every child in Greymere knew the stories of Aldric Vereen, the Alpha King who had united the fractured northern packs, who had slaughtered any wolf who stood against him, who had carved his kingdom out of blood and ice. He'd taken 3 fortresses in as many months, toppled Alphas twice his age. His name was whispered with a mix of awe and dread. Now he wanted a wife. Now he wanted her. You don't have to look like this for me, Mera said suddenly, voice softening. If you want, I can use that old glamour Aunt Brenna taught us. The one with the egg whites in the mirror. It smooths everything out. Makes you look like you spent all day sleeping instead of scrubbing pots. A memory flashed. 2 little girls in a kitchen long gone, smearing sticky egg across their noses, and laughing as their reflections blurred and brightened. Rina's mother, alive then, leaning in the doorway with flour on her apron and love in her eyes. Pain lanced through Rina's chest. No glamours, she said quietly. If Aldric's going to hate the sight of me, he might as well hate my real face. Mera's mouth tightened. He doesn't get to hate you, she said fiercely. He gets to be grateful you're saving all our hides. Rina managed a smile. Since when did you become so dramatic? Since my cousin became a queen, Mera said. And though her tone was light, her eyes shone. Queen. The word still didn't fit in her head. It slid around, catching on the jagged edges of who she was. Kitchen girl. Orphan. Ugly duckling. Not the kind of woman stories were written about. But stories rarely asked the women in them what they wanted. Mera handed her a folded piece of cloth. Put this on, she said. Uncle wants you veiled before you leave your chamber. Rina unfolded the veil. It was heavier than she'd expected. The fabric a fine, dense lace that would hang from the crown of her head to the middle of her chest. Tiny black beads had been sewn along the edges, catching the light. "They'll never see your face," Mera muttered. "Cowards," Rina hesitated. The idea of walking through the halls unseen, anonymous, was strangely tempting. She'd spent her whole life wishing she could disappear. Now, on the day she was being paraded like a sacrificial lamb, they were gifting her invisibility. "Maybe it's better this way," she said, lifting the veil. "If they can't see me, they can't assess me. They'll still whisper," Mera said. "It's what people do." Rina settled the veil over her hair. The world blurred, edges softening. Her own eyes stared back at her from behind the patterned lace, shadowed and strange. "Rina," Mera said suddenly, "if he hurts you—" "He won't," Rina said, even though she had no idea if that was true. "He has no reason to." "Men like him don't need reasons," Mera muttered. Then she straightened. "But if he does, send word. I'll come and set his bed on fire." Rina huffed out an unsteady laugh. "You'd be executed." "Worth it," Mera said, and pulled her into a hug that was awkward around the veil, but warm all the same. Rina let herself lean into it for a heartbeat longer than she should. Then Mera stepped back, blinking too fast, and pushed her gently toward the door. "Time to go, Duckling," she said. "Before Uncle remembers, he has one more lecture about obedience." The carriage smelled of leather, old straw, and nerves. Rina sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap as Greymere's walls rolled past the small window. The world outside filtered through the dark lace of her veil. Beside her, Uncle Harrow shifted his considerable bulk, every movement jangling the medallions on his vest. "Sit up straight," he said for the third time. "You're slouching." Rina straightened. Across from them, two of Aldric's envoys sat stiffly, their expressions unreadable. Both wore the black and silver of the Northern Court, the wolf sigil of calf veil embroidered over their hearts. The older one, a man with iron-grey hair and a scar bisecting his eyebrow, watched Rina with an assessing gaze that made her want to sink through the seat. "Your beta is spirited," he said at last, voice dry. Uncle Harrow cleared his throat. "Bran is loyal," he said. "He takes his duties seriously, including disciplining your future queen in front of the staff," the envoy asked mildly. Heat crept up Rina's neck. So they had seen. She should have known. Aldric's men would hardly ride into Greymere without watching everything. "The girl overstepped," Uncle Harrow said. "But the matter is settled. I assure you King Aldric will have no trouble managing her. She understands her place." The envoy's gaze lingered on Rina's veiled face. "Does she?" he asked quietly. Rina felt the words like a touch, probing. She kept her chin up, hands steady. "I understand that this marriage ensures peace," she said. "Anything else is extra." The envoy's mouth quirked as if she had surprised him. "Spoken like someone who has never been married," he said. "Extra tends to become everything over time." Uncle Harrow shifted, uncomfortable. "Lord Garin," he said, a warning note in his tone. "We agreed there would be no unnecessary questions." "Insight isn't unnecessary," Garin said. "Nor is honesty." Rina almost liked him for that. He looked at her again. "You know what they call you in the Northern Courts?" he asked. Uncle Harrow spluttered. "This is highly inappropriate." "They call you the ugly duckling," Garin said, ignoring her uncle. The girl Greymere scraped from the bottom of its barrel. "The sacrifice they can afford to lose." Uncle Harrow went red. "That is not sanctioned language," he snapped. Rina's fingers dug into her skirts. The words stung, but they weren't new. She'd heard variations whispered in Greymere's own halls. Somehow, hearing them spoken plain made them smaller, Less like knives, more like facts laid bare. Do they also call me peace? She asked. Or shield? Or price Graymere paid, so they didn't have to bury their sons? Garen's eyes widened just a fraction. Then, slowly he smiled. It wasn't unkind. Not yet, he said. But perhaps they should. Uncle Harrow huffed. She has always been opinionated, he said. I trust your king will curb that. Rina looked back out the window before she said something she'd regret. The road wound through dense forest, branches clawing at the sky. Somewhere beyond the trees lay the border, an invisible line that divided everything she had ever known from everything she had never even imagined. Her chest tightened. Graymere had not been kind to her, but it was familiar. She knew every draught in the kitchen, every loose stone in the courtyard. She knew which trees were best for climbing and which doors creaked if you tried to slip through them after curfew. She knew which wolves would turn their faces away when Bren raised his hand, and which would look on, satisfied. She didn't know anything about Carth Vale, Aldric's capital. Only stories. How many people has he killed? She asked suddenly, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Uncle Harrow choked. Rina. Garen's gaze sharpened. Personally, he asked. Or by order? Does it matter? She countered. He considered that. Not as much as you might think, he said. But you'll sleep better if you decide it does. That was not comforting. He has done what was necessary to unite the packs, Garen added more gently. Where there is war, there is death. Your marriage will make less of the former, and therefore less of the latter. That is not a small thing. Rina pressed her lips together. She wanted to say that it felt small when she imagined standing beside a stranger, while he slipped a ring on her finger, when she pictured a life lived in someone else's shadow. But Garen was right. Peace was not a small thing. You didn't get to choose the shape of the sacrifice you gave to buy it. She'd learned that the night her uncle folded her name into a treaty. Carth Vale rose from the valley like a fist. By the time they reached the city, Rina's legs were numb and her mind felt scraped hollow. The carriage wheels rattled over cobblestones, the sounds of the city seeping in around them. Vendors calling, children shouting, the distant clang of a forge. Wolves. So many wolves. Their scents twined in the air. Pine and steel and snow, all tinged with an edge of something sharp that made her own wolf curl tighter inside her. The castle loomed ahead, carved into the side of a mountain. Black stone towered overhead, banners snapping in the wind. The sigil of the Northlands, a silver wolf on a field of midnight, hung above the gate, staring down at them with eyes of polished quartz. Rina's palms went damp. Remember, Uncle Harrow murmured, as if they were alone. You represent Graymere. Hold your tongue. Keep your head bowed. Don't embarrass us. Us, not you. Not even him. As if the weight of an entire pack sat on her narrow shoulders. She wiped her hands on her skirt and lifted her chin. The carriage rolled to a stop in the shadow of the inner keep. When the door opened, cold air rushed in, biting her exposed skin. She stepped down onto stone worn smooth by centuries of boots and paws. The courtyard was full. Wolves lined the walls, some in armor, others in simple tunics. Their conversations stilled as she emerged, eyes turning toward the veiled figure who had crossed their borders in a treaty carriage. Curiosity pressed against her skin, prickling like static. Lady Rina of Graymere, Uncle Harrow announced, voice puffed with importance. Bride to His Majesty, King Aldric Varine. Her title sounded strange hanging in the cold air. From the far end of the courtyard, a group of men approached. Garen walked at their head, now wearing a dark cloak trimmed in fur. To his right strode a man Rina didn't recognize, younger, with a crooked nose and a grin that flashed white and quick. Between them moved another figure. Even without seeing his face, Rina knew. The air changed as he crossed the courtyard. Wolves straightened instinctively, spines lengthening, shoulders squaring. Conversation died completely. The weight of his presence pressed against Rina's skin, heavy as a storm front. King Aldric. He was taller than she'd imagined, broad-shouldered, the dark cloak flaring around his boots. His hair, black as raven feathers, was pulled back at the nape of his neck. He moved like one of the mountain cats Rina had seen once from a distance. Coiled, precise, utterly sure. Her wolf jolted awake. It wasn't a gentle stirring. It was a sudden, violent lurch, as if something inside her had been yanked toward him by an invisible thread. Her breath caught. Her hands twitched. No, she thought desperately. Not that. Not this. She'd heard the stories of mates, of wolves whose souls recognized each other on sight, whose lives snapped together like two halves of the same blade. It was a pretty story. A dangerous one. She didn't have the luxury of danger. Aldric stopped a few paces before her. Garin and the others hung back, forming a loose half-circle. The courtyard held its breath. "Lady Rina," he said. His voice was deeper than she'd expected, low and roughened at the edges, as if he'd been shouting over wind and war for so long, he'd forgotten how to speak softly. Rina bent her knee. The veil shifted with the movement, brush of lace against her cheeks. "Your Majesty," she said, keeping her gaze fixed on his boots, because she did not trust what her eyes might do if she lifted them. He was silent for a moment. She could feel his attention on her, as tangible as a hand. Her skin prickled under the weight of it. "You may rise," he said at last. She did, slowly. The world beyond the veil was a blur of shapes and shadows. She caught only the vaguest impression of his face. A strong jaw, the dark line of his mouth, the glint of light off something near his temple. The journey was not too hard, he asked. It was a polite question, the kind any host might ask a guest. Rina knew that. But somehow, in his mouth, it sounded like something else. A test. A measure. "No harder than expected," she said. "Your roads are well maintained." In the quiet that followed, Rina felt Uncle Harrow's horror radiating from behind her like heat. She'd just complimented the enemy king's infrastructure as if this were a trade banquet. Aldric made a sound that might have been a low huff of amusement. "I will inform my road wardens of your approval," he said. "Come. The ceremony is at dusk. There is much to prepare." He turned, the cloak flaring again, and for a moment the wind shifted. His scent rolled over her. Snow, pine sap, iron faint and metallic. Under it all, something warmer, darker, that her wolf lunged toward with a desperation that stole her breath. "Mine," the wolf whispered, so loudly she nearly staggered. Rina locked her knees. "No," she told herself. "He is your king, your duty, nothing more." But her wolf had never spoken with such clarity before. It pressed against her ribs, frantic, as if trying to claw its way closer, as if the space between them were a wound that needed closing. Rina forced her hands to remain at her sides. Fingers curled around the rough fabric of her dress. She followed when Garin gestured, her steps steady even as the world tilted beneath them. The chamber they gave her was larger than the entire floor she shared with the scullery maids in Greymere. High windows let in cold light. A massive bed draped in furs, so thick Rina was half afraid she'd sink and never surface again. A hearth big enough to roast a goat roared with flame. The air smelled of cedar and something bitter herbs burning in a bowl, meant to ward off ill luck. 3 women waited for her inside, their wolves humming faintly in the air. One was older. Her hair shot through with grey, hands folded neatly over her apron. The other two were younger, maybe Rina's age or a little older. Their expressions carefully neutral. "Your Majesty," the older one said, dipping a curtsy. "I'm Anya. I've been assigned as your lady's maid. These are Lysa and Tamsin. We'll help you prepare." "Your Majesty." The title still felt like a costume she was trying on, all stiff fabric and unfamiliar seams. "Just Rina for now," she said, and then flushed. "Until after the ceremony." Anya's mouth twitched. "As you wish," she said. "If you'll let us help you out of your travel things, we can start. The dressmaker sent up the gown an hour ago." The gown. Rina's stomach dropped. She'd worn nice dresses before Uncle had insisted she be presentable at certain functions, but nothing like what a queen would wear. She pictured drowning in silk, tripping over her own hem in front of the entire northern court. "Of course," she said, because it was the only answer she could give. They worked with efficient, impersonal hands. Lysa undid the ties of Rina's plain grey mere dress, while Tamsin carefully lifted the veil away, setting it aside with surprising gentleness. Anya unpinned Rina's hair, fingers surprisingly deft for someone with calloused palms. Rina stood in her chemise, feeling smaller and more exposed than she ever had in her life. Bruises bloomed along her arms, faint fingerprints from years of being grabbed, shoved, manhandled. The fresh mark on her cheek had darkened further. Anya's gaze lingered on it. "Bren?" she asked quietly. Rina blinked. "You know him?" "Every pack knows every other pack's betas," Anya said. "Some make better first impressions than others. Sit." Rina sat on the stool by the hearth. Anya began to work on her face with a skill that spoke of long practice, dabbing salve on the cut, smoothing tinted balm over the bruise until it blurred into something almost natural. Lysa and Tamsin sorted through bolts of fabric and jewelry boxes, murmuring. "He shouldn't have hit you," Anya said. "Not today. Not ever." "He thinks it keeps me in line," Rina said, before she could swallow the words. "Does it?" Anya asked. Rina thought of Thomas's thin face, the way his fingers had trembled as he shoved the stolen meat into his mouth. "No," she said. "It just makes me better at hiding when I do what I want anyway." Anya's eyes warmed. "Good," she said simply. Lifted the veil. The lace whispered up and away from her face, beads clicking faintly like distant rain. Cold air rushed in, kissing skin that had been shadowed all day. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow to a tunnel that began at Aldric's hands and ended at his eyes. Rina had braced herself for disgust. She waited for the familiar flicker eyes dragging over the scar along her cheek, with that small jerk of pity or revulsion, mouth tightening, gaze skittering away. Instead, Aldric went very, very still. It was not the stiffening of a man offended. It was something else. The kind of stillness that came before a storm broke or a predator leapt. The great hall held its breath. Rina felt every inch of herself under his scrutiny. The two big eyes smudged by sleeplessness. The bruise along her cheekbone imperfectly concealed by Anya. His careful work the faint white line of the old burned scar, curling from temple to jaw like a crescent moon. Her mouth wanted to tremble and she ordered it not to. Queens did not tremble. Aldric's gaze moved slowly, deliberate as a hand. He took in the bruise first. His eyes dark, almost black this close flared, the pupils expanding. The muscle in his jaw flexed. For a heartbeat, raw fury burned there, hot and naked. Rina's breath snagged. Then, as if the rage had been stuffed into an invisible fist, his expression smoothed. The mask of a king slid back into place. But she had seen it. He wasn't offended by her. He was furious on her behalf. Her thoughts stuttered. A murmur rippled through the hall. people craning for a better look now that the veil no longer hid the face of the girl Greymere had sent. She felt their stares like fingers, counting flaws, cataloguing. Ugly Duckling, their rumors had called her. Only Aldric wasn't looking away. He took a slow breath, and she felt the pull of it in her own lungs, like they'd been suddenly cinched. His wolf pressed hard against the air between them. She couldn't see it, but she felt it. The weight and heat of a predator scenting something it recognized. Her own wolf answered, not with its usual hesitant stir, but with a fierce, wild lunge that nearly buckled her knees. Mine. The word wasn't thought so much as sensation. A tidal pull from somewhere deep in her bones. Rina's stomach swooped. No, that was impossible. People like her did not get fairy stories. They got treaties and orders and veils. Rina, Aldric said quietly. Just her name. On his tongue it sounded different. Less like a burden, more like something he was trying on for weight. The priest cleared his throat gently, as if reminding them that an entire hall full of witnesses was still present. By word and witness you are bound, he declared, voice lifting to reach the furthest shadows. Let peace hold where war threatened. Let the goddess bless this union. Applause rose, polite but wary. The Northlands were watching their king, not his new queen. Wolves measured everything by strength. If Aldric so much as twitched wrong, the room would feel it ripple. He did not twitch. Instead he reached for her hand. Rina had held hands before Mayra's, Thomas's, the rough grip of an aunt tugging her out of someone's way. But when Aldric's fingers closed around hers, it felt like a promise and a threat braided together. Heat shivered up her arm. His palm was calloused, skin rough in a way that spoke of weapons, not courtly leisure. His grip was careful, though, almost absurdly so. A man who could crush bone with a careless squeeze, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. He lifted her hand to his mouth. For a heartbeat, panic spiked. A kiss in front of all these people. Her wolf howled, a soundless, desperate rush. Her heart hammered so hard she was sure he could feel it through her skin. His lips brushed her knuckles barely, a ghost of a touch, and something inside her cracked open. It wasn't attraction, though that simmered there too, unexpected and blinding. It was recognition, as if some locked door in her chest had swung inward and a breath she'd been holding for years finally spilled out. Aldric's thumb stroked once, absent-mindedly, over the back of her hand. Mine. Something in him answered her wolf's cry. She saw it in the way his pupils blew wide, in the faint tremor that ran through his fingers before he let her go. He stepped back, putting careful space between them. Welcome to Karth Vale, Rina Varine, he said, just loud enough for the hall to hear. Varine. His name. Her name now. There it was. She thought numbly. A life rewritten in 3 syllables. The feast that followed blurred around the edges. Rina sat at the high table with a goblet of watered wine sweating against her palm, trying not to flinch at every clatter of plate or shout of laughter. Wolves were not quiet eaters. They tore into meat with relish, argued loudly, threw bones to the dogs slinking between benches. The scents were overwhelming. Roasted boar and venison, spiced root vegetables, sweet berry tarts, the metallic tang of blood from cuts too fresh to have fully clotted. Underneath it all, Aldric's presence at her side pulsed like a second heartbeat. He had not touched her again. He ate, spoke little, listened a lot. His focus moved constantly, tracking conversations, stray tensions. Once, when a pair of young warriors in the corner nearly came to blows over a spilled drink, he merely lifted his gaze. The fight died mid-snap. Power, Rina thought, watching the way the room bent around him. This was what true power looked like. Not Bren's petty cruelty or Harrow's puffed-up authority, but something quieter and infinitely more dangerous. And she was tethered to it now. "Your Majesty," a voice said to her left. Rina blinked. She hadn't realized anyone had approached. A young woman stood there, tray balanced expertly on one hip. Her apron was clean, her hair braided neatly back under a scarf. She dipped a curtsy. "I'm Lysa's sister, Mara," she said. "From the kitchens. We just wanted to say the dress looks. Well, it's nice to see it on a person and not the dummy." She flushed, clearly regretting every word. Rina's lips quirked. "Thank you," she said. "You'll have to tell the cook the boar is excellent." "Oh, I will," Mara said, brightening. "He's been threatening to throw himself into the oven if the king doesn't like it." Aldric's fork paused midway to his mouth. "The boar is fine," he said. Mara jumped. Yes, Your Majesty." She darted away. Rina bit back a smile. "You terrify your staff," she murmured, just for him. "Fear is efficient," he said. "Fear breeds lies," she countered, surprising herself. His gaze cut toward her, sharp and assessing. "You prefer what? Fondness?" "Honesty," she said. "It is hard to get from people who are convinced you'll rip their throats out if they speak it." Something flickered over his face. Not offense. Something closer to amusement mixed with curiosity. "You speak it to me," he said. "I'm already bound to you by treaty and goddess," Rina said. "Offending you seems like a lesser risk at this point." He huffed out something that might have been a laugh, though it sounded like it had surprised him as much as her. From further down the table, a voice cut through the hum of conversation. "So that's the duckling." The words weren't whispered. They were pitched to carry. Rina's spine went rigid. She didn't turn her head. She didn't have to. The voice belonged to a woman, her tone cool and edged. Somewhere in the middle tables, people shifted, the motion sending a small wave through the hall. "Mind your tongue," another voice replied softly. Anya, Rina realized a moment later. She hadn't even known the older woman was in the hall. "What?" the first woman said, still loud enough. "It's what they called her. Ugly little duckling of Greymere. I'm only checking if the name fits." Rina stared at her plate. Her cheeks burned hot. Of course the rumor had reached here first. Of course her name had arrived before she did. Detached from her body and filled with other people's meanings. The scrape of a chair sounded loud in the sudden lull. "Stand," Aldric said. His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. The woman who, de-spoken, a blonde with braided hair and the kind of sharp beauty that belonged on statues, rose slowly from her bench, chin tilted. "Your Majesty?" she asked. "What is your name?" he said. "Lady Sera of Frostfall." She dipped a curtsy that somehow managed to look insolent. "Lady Sera," Aldrich said. "Do you believe your king chooses his wife poorly?" A dimple appeared at the corner of her mouth. "I believe Greymere chose the wife they could most easily spare," she said. "I would never question you, Your Majesty," the hall hummed. Rina could feel eyes bouncing between Sera and the high table like thrown stones. "That is fortunate," Aldrich said, "because you do not get to question me." He leaned back slightly, one arm coming to rest along the back of Rina's chair, casual and proprietary. "You will not use the word duckling in reference to your queen again. Not in my hall, not in whispers, not in your own head." Sera's smile faltered. "In my own, you will try," he said, and now the warmth was gone from his voice, leaving only iron. "Because if I hear it again, I will assume you are hard of hearing and assign you to the border scouts, where the wind might clear your ears. Do you understand?" A beat of silence. Then Sera bowed her head. "Yes, Your Majesty," she said tightly. "You may sit," he said. She did, slow and stiff. Conversation crept back in, cautious at first, then swelling to its previous volume. Wolves liked a good show, and the king defending his queen's honor, ugly duckling or not, was very much a show. Rina stared straight ahead. His queen. The words shouldn't have meant anything. They were part of the role, like her gown and the title and the seat at his side. But hearing him claim her publicly, without flinching at the rumor that had chased her here, did something strange to her chest. Was that necessary? She asked under her breath. Yes, he said. You just painted a target on my back, she murmured. She hate me now. They all will. They'll respect you, he said. Or they'll fear me. Both will do. She shook her head faintly, lips curving despite herself. You really do think fear solves everything? It has solved most of what I've asked it to, he said. Except, it seems, your tongue. You wouldn't want it any other way, she said. He went silent at that, and she had the unnerving feeling she'd stepped into some thought of his she couldn't see. Later, when the hall had emptied and the last of the guests had staggered off to their chambers, Rina found herself walking beside Aldric through quieter corridors. The torches here burned lower, the stone floors softened by thick carpets. The air smelled of beeswax and something clean, like fresh linens. A servant padded ahead of them with a lantern, keeping a respectful distance. Her hand brushed Aldric's once as they turned a corner. The contact jolted them both. Forgive me, she said quickly. For what? He asked. Existing near you, she said. The words slipped out with more sharpness than she intended. He huffed. You can't offend me by being in your own home. Home. The word echoed uncomfortably. This is your wing, he added. Your chambers are ahead. Mine are through there. He nodded toward a side passage. It was decided by who? She asked. He glanced at her, surprised. Tradition, council, me. And what did you decide? She said. That you would have space, he said. I did not know what Greymere was sending me, beyond a treaty clause and rumors. The ugly duckling, she said quietly. His mouth tightened. I thought, he said, slowly, as if choosing his way through an unfamiliar forest. They would send me a girl they did not value, someone who would cower in corners and flinch at shadows. I wanted to give such a girl a door she could close. Rina's steps faltered. So you did think you were marrying a duckling, she said. I thought I was marrying a stranger with no reason to trust me, he said. Now I am certain of it. She almost laughed. Instead, she asked, and now? They had reached a set of double doors carved with scenes of running wolves and rivers. Aldric stopped, facing her fully for the first time without the hall's eyes on them. Light from the lantern painted his face in gold and shadow. Up close, she saw the lines carved around his mouth, the faint scar at his temple that glinted silver through his hair, the tiredness tucked into the corners of his eyes. King, her mind had labeled him earlier. Warrior. Threat. Now another word slid in. Man. A treaty bride. Plain or not, I could have accepted easily, he said. But whatever fool started that rumor did not see you properly. His gaze traced her face again. Slower this time, taking in the scar like it was part of a map he meant to memorize. There is nothing duckling about you. Heat crept up her neck. Scars ruin most metaphors, she said. His gaze sharpened. Who gave you that? The fire, she said, when I was 3. It took my parents and left me a little souvenir. His jaw clenched. And the bruise? Reflex made her lie. I fell. He stared at her. Try again, he said. She swallowed. It doesn't matter. It does to me, he said quietly. There it was again. That flicker of fury banked under his control. She realized with a jolt that whatever else he was, Aldric Varine was not a man who tolerated anyone damaging something that belonged to his protection. And like it or not, she was under that protection now. Greymere's beta has a heavy hand, she said finally. He believes fear is efficient too. Aldric's eyes went flat and cold. Bren, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, she said. And your uncle allowed it, he said. Rina lifted her chin. He allowed many things, she said. But Greymere is still standing, and your armies are not camped at our gates. So perhaps you should send him a thank you instead of judgment. His nostrils flared. Do you always defend the people who hurt you? Do you always attack the people who've already lost? She countered. Silence stretched between them. Not empty a taut, pulsing thing. You are not weak, he said at last. That disappoints you? She asked. It complicates things, he said. But no, it does not disappoint me. Her heartbeat stuttered. He took a step back, giving her space again. These are your chambers, he said, nodding to the doors. You may sleep here tonight. Alone, if you wish. Rina blinked. Alone, she repeated. He lifted a hand, as if to reach for her, then dropped it. This marriage was forged in politics, not courtship, he said. I will not force your body to follow where your trust has not yet gone. Relief and something like disappointment tangled in her chest. My uncle will be furious, she said. He expects an heir as soon as possible. Your uncle does not rule my bed, Aldric said. Or my queen. His mouth twisted. Though I suspect he has been trying to do both for years. She huffed out a breath that was almost a laugh. You're not wrong. He looked at her a moment longer, his wolf pressing against the space between them like a large animal testing a fence. Rina, he said, whatever else this becomes, you will be safe here. The words were simple. A statement, not a vow. But her wolf stilled, listening. Safe. She wanted to believe him so badly her teeth ached with it. Good night, Your Majesty, she said, because believing a stranger on the first night of her marriage seemed the height of foolishness. He held her gaze for a heartbeat more. Good night, he said. Then, softer, Rina. He turned and walked away down the corridor, his footsteps fading into the quiet. She watched him until he disappeared around a bend. Only then did she push the heavy doors open and step into her chambers. She did not sleep. The bed was impossibly soft, swallowing her weight. Furs cocooned her in warmth. A fire burned low in the hearth, throwing shadows across the ceiling. The castle creaked and breathed around her, settling into its night rhythm. Inside, Rina's thoughts refused to settle. Her wolf paced under her skin, still jangling from the ceremony, from the unveiling, from Aldric's scent, and the way his eyes had flared when he saw her. Mate, it whispered, over and over. Mine. Mine. She curled on her side and pressed a hand to her sternum, as if she could physically hold it back. Stop, she whispered into the dark. You're making this worse. The wolf huffed, unconvinced. She thought of Thomas's thin face, of Mayra's fierce hug, of Greymere's uneven walls. Somewhere, the moon would be rising over that old fortress, casting the same cold light over the courtyard where she'd spent afternoons scrubbing pots and pretending not to hear herself called names. Now here, she had a gown fit for a queen hanging over a chair, and a king who had told a titled noblewoman he would exile her for calling Rina a duckling. The world had tilted sharply in less than a day. She closed her eyes. In the space just before sleep, an image floated up from memory without her bidding. Aldric's face when he lifted the veil. Not the controlled version everyone else saw, but the split-second crack in his composure, where shock and something like wonder had flashed. No one had ever looked at her like that. Her throat tightened. She rolled onto her back and stared at the ceiling until dawn began to grey the windows. Morning came with a knock at the door and Anya's brisk voice. "Up, Your Majesty," she called. "The court will want to see you don't melt in sunlight." Rina scrambled into a sitting position, dragging the furs up around her shoulders out of habit. "Come in," she croaked. Anya entered with a tray steaming with porridge and tea. Behind her, Lysa and Tamsin followed with fresh linens and a gown in a blue so deep it was nearly black. "How was your night?" Anya asked, setting the tray down. "Long," Rina said honestly. Anya studied her face. "Dreams?" "Too much thinking," Rina said. "Not enough sleeping." "Welcome to being queen," Anya said dryly. They helped her wash and dress, their movements efficient. The new gown fit just as well as the first. Simpler, but still finely made. When Anya twisted Rina's hair up, she left a few tendrils to soften the edges of her face. "No veil?" Rina asked. "The king sent word," Anya said. "No more veils indoors. He says his court has eyes. They can use them." Rina's heart thudded. "So the whole castle will know exactly how ugly I am by midday," she said before she could swallow the old reflex. Anya gave her a look. "You are many things," she said. "But if you say that word about yourself again, I will make you eat my hairpins." Rina stared at her, then laughed, startled. "I don't think that's in the protocol." "Protocol is whatever we survive," Anya said. "Now, eat something before your first audience. You'll need the energy." "First what?" Rina asked, alarm prickling. "Small petitions," Anya said. "People who've been waiting to see what kind of queen they got. It will be light today. A few disputes, some requests. Garen will be there. The king too, if he's finished with the war council." "War council?" Rina repeated. "This is the north," Anya said. "There is always a war council. Don't worry. They know how to sit through politics and then smile for the people. You'll learn." Rina was not at all sure about that. But a short time later, she found herself seated beside Aldric again, this time not in the echoing immensity of the great hall, but in a smaller chamber, lined with books, a throne room scaled down for everyday use. Light poured through tall windows. A long carpet ran from the doors to the pair of carved chairs where Aldric and Rina sat. Garen stood at Aldric's right hand. A scribe hunched at a small table nearby, quill ready. "Breathe," Aldric murmured without looking at her. "I am breathing," she said. "You're doing it like someone about to dive into freezing water," he said. She slanted him a look. "You asked for a Greymere bride. This is what we do there. We hold our breath and hope we survive." The corner of his mouth ticked. The doors opened. One by one, people approached. A farmer complaining about a neighbor's encroaching fence. A blacksmith requesting more iron allotment. A woman whose son had been injured in a border skirmish, asking for compensation. Rina listened. She'd always been good at that, scrubbing pots in corners while adults talked around her, drinking in everything. Now, with no bucket in her hands to hide behind, she found herself leaning forward, asking questions. "What do you use the extra strip of land for?" she asked the first man. "Turnips, Your Majesty," he said, twisting his cap. "And a few herbs for my wife." "And you?" she asked the neighbor. "Grazing," the woman said. "My goats wander. They don't heed imaginary lines." Aldric watched, saying little, letting her tug at threads. "Could you fence the herbs?" Rina asked. "And mark the grazing edge with stones so the goats know where to stop? If the king's steward sends someone to help you set the line, will you both agree to keep it?" The farmer and the neighbor exchanged glances. "Aye," the man said. "If that's what you think is right, Your Majesty." Rina felt heat rise to her cheeks. It seems fair, she said. Garin, the advisor, inclined his head. We can spare a hand, he said. I'll have it written. Aldric's eyes met hers, something like approval warming their dark depths. By the time the last petitioner left, Rina's throat was dry, and her hand ached from clenching the arm of her chair whenever someone called her Your Majesty, like they meant it. You did well, Garin said once the door closed. She did more than well, Aldric said. She listened. Rina blinked. What else would I do?
Many nobles like the sound of their own voices too much to leave room for others, Garin said. Rina thought of Uncle Harrow and his booming speeches at Greymere. I've noticed, she said. Aldric stood, stretching slightly. The movement pulled his tunic tight across his shoulders. Her eyes caught there before she could stop them. Her wolf perked, smug. Rina looked away quickly. There is a diplomatic supper tonight, Aldric said. Envoys from the eastern marshes have arrived. They will want to see you. More strangers, she said. Fewer than yesterday, he said. They will all want to judge what kind of queen you are. And what kind am I? She asked lightly. His gaze held hers, steady. The kind who stands up to her beta in a kitchen full of witnesses, he said. The kind who asks a farmer about his wife's herbs. Her chest tightened. You make that sound admirable instead of foolish. Foolishness gets people killed, he said. You kept a child from going hungry and turned an insult into a warning for my court. I call that something else. What? She asked, before she could stop herself. His mouth curved slowly. Bravery, he said. Her breath snagged. No one had ever used that word for her. Stubborn, yes. Difficult, ungrateful sometimes, but brave. That belonged to warriors and scouts and people whose wolves roared instead of wind. She opened her mouth to deflect, but a knock at the door saved her from having to answer. Enter, Aldric called. The door opened. Uncle Harrow stepped in, flanked by 2 Greymere guards and looking as out of place as a plump house cat in a den of wild things. Your Majesty, he boomed, bowing low. Forgive the intrusion. I was told this was your lesser hall. Rina's stomach dropped. She hadn't seen him since the ceremony. Part of her had hoped he would stay buried in guest quarters until someone politely escorted him back across the border. Harrow of Greymere Aldric said, I trust your accommodations are sufficient. More than sufficient, Your Majesty, Harrow said. You honor us. Rina watched the way his eyes flicked around the room, cataloguing tapestries and chairs and the guards at the door. He always measured value in things, not people. What brings you? Aldric asked. Harrow straightened. I come to ensure that my niece has fulfilled her part of the treaty. He said, it is vital to my pack that the union be complete. Rina felt heat flood her face. Uncle, she hissed. He ignored her. I do not mean to pry into royal matters, of course, he added, with the oily politeness of someone doing exactly that. But the terms specified marriage, Aldric said, his voice going cool, which has been fulfilled. The rest is not your concern, Harrow's. Smile tightened. With respect, Your Majesty, my people sacrificed a great deal to send Rina here. They deserve assurance that what? Aldric asked softly. That I have taken your niece to my bed like a stallion with a broodmare. The air in the room went razor sharp. Harrow paled. I would never put it so crudely, he said. You just did, Aldric said. Rina's hands were fists in her lap. Shame and anger warred in her chest. Uncle, please, she said, the plea scraping her throat. You're embarrassing yourself. And you, he snapped, for the first time dropping the veneer in front of strangers. Do you understand what hangs on this Gramir's safety depends on? Gramir's. Safety depends on my word, Aldric said, his tone still quiet, but carrying more threat than a shouted command. Not on my seed, not on your niece's womb, and certainly not on your rudeness. Harrow's mouth opened and closed. But the treaty secures peace, Aldric said. I suggested marriage to make it stronger. That suggestion does not give you license to question my private life in my own court. Harrow swallowed hard. Of course, Your Majesty, he said shakily. I meant no offense. You delivered it anyway, Aldric said. You are a guest in my house. You will remember that. You will also remember that if you ever raise your hand to my queen again, I will consider it an act of aggression from Gramir, not a family matter. Silence slammed into the room. Rina's heart stopped. Harrow went grey. I beg your pardon, he whispered. Aldric's gaze didn't waver. Bren left marks on her the day you arrived. He said, you allowed it. That ends now. She is under my protection. Harm her again, and I will respond as a king, not as a patient son-in-law. The word harm echoed in Rina's chest like a bell. Harrow darted a glance at her, fury and fear tangled in his eyes. You've turned her against her own pack, he said to Aldric. No, Rina said, finding her voice. You did that when you decided my skin was an acceptable place to write your frustrations. He recoiled, as if she'd struck him. This audience is over, Aldric said. Harrow bowed stiffly. Your Majesty, he said. Niece. The last word was flat as old water. He turned and strode out, his guards scrambling to follow. The door closed with a dull thud.
Rina stared at it, chest heaving. I shouldn't have said that, she whispered. You've made an enemy. I have enough enemies to form a choir, Aldric said. One more makes no difference. He's still my blood, she said. And you are my queen, he said. The words landed between them like a thrown knife, sharp and startling. Her throat worked. You keep saying that as if it means something. It does, he said. To me. She didn't know what to do with that. So she stood, needing movement, air. I should walk, she said. Before supper. Clear my head. Take a guard, Aldric said. The inner courtyards are safe. But caution is a habit I like in my people. I'll take Anya, she said. She's more dangerous than 3 guards, and you know it. Garin murmured. Rina almost smiled. The courtyard Anya led her to was tucked behind the west wing, sheltered from the worst of the wind. A small garden slept under a dusting of frost, herbs and shrubs trimmed back for winter. A stone bench sat under a leafless tree, its branches scribbled against the pale sky. It's quiet here, Anya said. The warriors prefer the training yards. The gossipers like the front lawns. Rina sat, wrapping her cloak tighter. Thank you, she said. For earlier. In the hall. Anya shrugged. Sira's been sharpening that tongue since she grew teeth. It was only a matter of time before she cut herself on it. Rina huffed out a breath that turned to white mist. Aldric made an example of her because of me. Because of respect, Anya said. The court needed to see where the lines are. You just happen to be one of them now. Lucky me, Rina muttered. Anya's gaze softened. You're handling this better than most would, she said. We've had highborn ladies come north and dissolve into tears because the bathwater wasn't scented properly. I scrubbed pots for a decade, Rina said. Scented baths seem like a luxury, not a requirement. There it is, Anya said. Your secret weapon. Rina blinked. What weapon? You know what it is to be small, Anya said. Overlooked. You see things the others don't. You won't forget the kitchen just because someone put a crown on your head. Rina's throat tightened. Does that make me a good queen? She asked and hated how small the question sounded. It makes you a dangerous one, Anya said. And in this world, that's often the same thing. They sat in companionable silence for a while, breath puffing in the cold. Somewhere above, a raven called, its harsh cry slicing across the sky. Rina thought of Aldric in his war councils, of Harrow skulking in guest chambers, of Bren back in Greymere finding new pups to take his moods out on. She thought of Tommy's and his thin shoulders. I want to send word home, she said suddenly. Not to Harrow, to others. Mayra? Anya guessed. Rina nodded, startled. How did you? Your cousin's name came up in the envoy reports, Anya said. She argued with Bren about where you'd be sent to say goodbye. He threatened to lock her in a cellar. She said she'd set it on fire from the inside. Rina's lips twitched. That sounds like her. Right, Anya said. I'll see that it goes with the next messenger. Aldric won't object. Rina hesitated. He has enough to worry about. I don't want to seem demanding. Anya snorted. You are his queen, she said. You're allowed to want news of home, and he's allowed to say yes. That's how partnership works, if you're lucky. Partnership. The word felt as dangerous as any sword. That night, the diplomatic supper blurred only slightly less than the wedding feast had. There were more languages in the room, more colours in the clothing, more scents layering the air. Rina did her best to remember names and territories, to smile when appropriate and listen whenever possible. Aldric stayed close, his presence a steady line at her side. When she faltered over a foreign custom, he stepped in smoothly. When an Eastern envoy made a sly remark about Greymere's choice of bride, Aldric's gaze froze the words in the man's throat. By the time she collapsed into bed, fully clothed, her head spun. She woke in the dark to the feeling of being watched. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She kept her breathing even, every sense straining. The fire had burned low. Shadows crouched in the corners. The room was silent, no scrape of intrusive boots, no wheeze of a door. And yet, her wolf was awake. Not pacing or frantic this time, but alert, ears pricked. Carefully, Rina rolled onto her back and stared at the canopy. Is there a ghost I should know about? She whispered. Silence. She almost convinced herself she'd imagined it when a faint movement near the window caught her eye. A figure stepped out of the deepest shadow. Rina's hand flew to the knife Anya had insisted she keep under her pillow. Her fingers wrapped around the hilt. Heart hammering. Stay back, she said, her voice low and deadly serious. Moonlight poured across the floor, washing over the intruder. Aldric, he straightened, palms lifting slightly to show they were empty. "I knock," he said quietly. "You were far away." Rina's grip loosened on the knife. Embarrassment flushed hot through her. "You can't lurk in corners like that," she hissed. "You nearly got a blade in your ribs." "A risk I should have considered," he said dryly. "May I?" He nodded toward the chair near the hearth. She swallowed. "Yes," she said, because she had no idea what else to say to a king caught skulking in her bedchamber. He crossed the room with that same coiled grace, cloak whispering. Even half in shadow, he was too much too big, too solid, too present. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Failing to sleep," he said. "And checking that you are not doing the same." She snorted softly. "We're very bad at it, apparently." He sat, elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely. For a moment he simply watched the fire. "In my first year as king," he said, "I made a decision that cost 40 men their lives." Her breath caught. She hadn't expected confession. "I sent them to hold a pass I thought was defensible," he said. "I was wrong. The enemy came from the river instead. By the time we realized, the pass was gone, and so were they." He rubbed a thumb over his knuckles. "I did not sleep much after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, their families." Rina sat up, drawing her knees to her chest under the furs. "You were how old?" she asked. 20, he said. "You were barely more than a pup," she said. His mouth quirked. "Don't let the court hear you say that. They already think I'm a duckling," she said. "Might as well add treason to my crimes." He huffed out a breath that might have been a laugh. "The point," he said, "is that leadership breeds ghosts. They sit on your chest at night and whisper into your ears. Some nights they are louder than others. And tonight?" she asked softly. "Tonight they are quieter than usual," he said. "But there is a new voice in the mix. I thought facing it would help." She frowned. "What voice?" He looked at her, eyes dark in the firelight. "Yours," he said, "telling me I think fear solves everything." Heat crept up her chest. "I shouldn't have said that," she said. "It was rude. It was accurate," he said, "and inconvenient. I dislike both qualities in equal measure." She smiled despite herself. They sat in silence for a moment, the crackle of the fire filling the room. "You don't have to sit alone with them," she said quietly. "The ghosts." He tilted his head. "Who else should I inflict them on?" "Your queen, apparently," she said. "That seems to be in the job description." His gaze softened. "You would share that?" She swallowed. The word share wrapped oddly around her ribs. "We're bound," she said. "By more than treaties, I think." Her wolf pressed, nodding emphatically. "We might as well figure out what that means." He studied her for a long, quiet moment. "I can feel it too," he said at last. "The pull, the wrongness when I step too far away from you." His jaw flexed. "I did not expect that." "Mates," her wolf whispered, thrilled. Rina's heart beat against her ribs like a bird. "Do you believe in it?" she asked. "The old stories?" "I have seen enough to know there is truth in them," he said. "Bonds, threads, call them what you like. They make life easier for some and harder for others." "Which are we?" she asked. His mouth twitched. "Ask me when Greymere is no longer watching, and my own court has decided whether to kill you or adore you," he said. "Comforting," she muttered. He shifted in the chair. "I will not claim you fully until you ask," he said abruptly. Her breath caught. "Claim?" "Mark," he said. His hand went to his own shoulder, fingers brushing the spot where a wolf would bite to seal a bond. "In front of the goddess, in front of the pack. It is more binding than any vow spoken in a hall." Her throat went dry. She'd seen marked pairs before, how they moved around each other, how their wolves curled together like roots underground. Why? She asked. You have every right. By law, by treaty. Rights are tools, he said. I have many. I do not need to use them all at once. And I have spent too many years forcing outcomes on others to stomach the idea of forcing this on you. Her eyes burned suddenly. She blinked hard. You should sleep, he said, standing. The ghosts and I will argue more quietly if I know you were not listening at the keyhole. I was asleep, she protested. You were cracking your knuckles in your sleep, he said. It was distracting. She flushed. Sorry. He stepped toward the door, then paused, turning back. Rina, he said. Tomorrow I will send word to Greymere, not to Harrow. To their council. I will make it clear that Bren's behavior toward you is known and unacceptable. Ice slid down her spine. They'll blame me, she said. They will blame whatever they like, he said. But they will not touch you again. And if Bren raises his hand to another pup, there'll be consequences. Consequences, she echoed. His eyes were very, very calm. I do not tolerate men who starve children to prove points, he said, or who strike queens to remind themselves of their importance. Her heart thudded. You would go to war over that. I would end a man over that, he said. War is for larger things. Fear and fierce, wild relief tangled in her chest. You can't just execute another Pax Beta, she said. Watch me, he said. The words should have chilled her. Instead, they made her feel for the first time since she'd been handed the treaty parchment like a sentence. Like someone was finally standing between her and the world, instead of shoving her out in front of it. Aldric, she said softly. He looked back from the doorway. I don't want more blood on your ghosts because of me, she said. He studied her, eyes dark and steady. You didn't put the ghosts there, he said. You might help me live with them. He opened the door. In the hallway beyond, shadows stretched long and deep. We will talk tomorrow, he said. About bombs. About Bren. About everything. A faint, wry smile touched his mouth. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. He stepped out and closed the door behind him. Rina sat there in the dark, her hand pressed flat over her racing heart. The echo of his words hanging between the stones and the shadows. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Alpha King saw she fed the pup. A hand clamped her shoulder too hard. Kestrel Rune didn't drop the spoon because she was clumsy. She let it go to keep the pup from seeing her wince. Broth splashed her wrist, hot enough to sting, not hot enough to matter compared to the crushing grip. Eyes down, ghost. Bren murmured, breath sour with old ale. His fingers tightened, turning old yellow bruises into violet. Beta says you don't serve bowls without permission. You don't breathe without permission. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. Kestrel's gaze fixed on the bowl steaming in her palm. A pup's thin hand waited open on the other side of it, patient the way hungry children learn to be. Don't spill. Don't fight. Don't make it worse. I'm sorry, she said, and made her voice soft. Not the apology of a challenge, but of a wallflower brushing past a boot. The kitchen was loud enough with pans, knives, the wet slap of meat still. Bren's tone cut through like a blade. Speak up, he said, or the beta won't hear how respectful you are. Respectful. The word tasted like iron on her tongue. She found the pup's gaze again, big brown eyes in a narrow face, and forced a smile. Eat slowly, little Reed. She'd named him for the way he bent around hurts and didn't break. It was a dangerous thing, naming anything here. The pack took names and turned them into leashes.
"Let the Omega work," Cook snapped from the far burners without looking up. "You breathe down her neck and I'll season your stew with your own teeth." Bren laughed the way men laugh when they know threats are for show. He released Kestrel's shoulder with a final dig of his thumb, then swept his knuckles deliberately across the pale column of her throat in a touch that wasn't a touch. "Beta Merrick wants you after breakfast. Don't dawdle." Heat rushed beneath Kestrel's skin, and then fled, leaving cold. She kept the bowl steady, and passed it into the pup's hands as if nothing had happened. Don't dawdle meant don't hide. It meant report to the office with the locked cabinet and the silver-buckled strap that sang when it met bone. It meant tonight she would sleep on her stomach again. "You're shaking," the pup whispered. "Only from hunger," she lied, setting another crust of bread on the rim. He clutched the bowl like a treasure and fled, bare heels pattering across stone. Boots struck the threshold 3 beats later, 24 at least, heavy, disciplined. The kitchen's racket collapsed into silence with a sound like breath being held. Of course. They hadn't lied about the inspection. The Crown had sent its wolves. Kestrel did not need to look to know what every body in the room felt. A pressure against the air, the contour of dominance that made spines straighten and eyes dip. She looked anyway. She always looked. It was a ruinous habit, and it is also how small creatures survive. They learn the pattern of larger creatures' shadows. The Alpha King wore no crown. He was not the tallest in his retinue, nor the broadest across the shoulders. He didn't have to be. Power moved around him like a tide following a moon. Men made way without being told. He stepped into a kitchen that had never been quiet, and it held its breath for him. "Continue," he said, and the word wasn't loud. It just left no room for a competing idea. Knives resumed their rhythm. Water hissed. Cook swore softly at a pan that chose that exact traitorous moment to sputter. Kestrel did not move. That was a choice too. Move and you can be seen. Freeze and you can be seen. The safer gamble was to turn fully toward her work and be ordinary at it. Ladle. Bread. Ladle again. "Who is responsible for distributing the morning ration to the denlings?" the king asked. Cook jerked her chin at Kestrel without looking away from her pots. Kestrel felt the point of it like a finger pressed between her shoulder blades. "Her," Cook said. "She keeps them from fighting over the bowls, knows their names." The king's attention, when it came, was a physical thing. Kestrel had not been named for color. The white hair, the ash-pale skin, the storm-glass eyes, not by any mother or father she remembered. She'd been named for a small hawk that watches and waits and dives only when there is no other choice. "Kestrel Rune," the king said. Not a question. Her mouth dried. Bren had not whispered her name. Cook had only jerked a chin. Names held badly in kitchens and halls. They evaporated. That he knew hers meant he either read every ledger that crossed his desk personally, or that her name lived in a place most names didn't go, the place where problems are listed, or debts. "My lord," she said, and inclined her head just enough to show respect, not servility. He didn't look at her hair first as other men did, curious or cruel in equal measure. He looked at her hands. Her left knuckles were pinked with broth flush. Her right wrist, she saw the exact instant he noticed, bloomed with finger-shaped shadows, old ones buried beneath new. The new ones were still rising, ink and water. "Who marked you?" It was not gentled into a question. Kestrel did 3 things at once, kept her face empty, kept her pulse from leaping, and kept from glancing toward Bren. Any of those would have become a confession. "No one, Your Majesty," she said softly. "I bruise easily." His gaze lifted to her eyes. He had eyes people wrote poems about when they were young and stupid. Not merely dark, but deep, and not merely deep, but assessing. "Don't lie to me," he said, each word careful as a coin set on a table. Whoever hurt the albino Omega will pay for it. Bren coughed a laugh and pretended to hide it in his fist. The room heard it. The room wished it hadn't. Kestrel's stomach dipped. Her throat wanted to say nothing. Her memory, traitor, offered up a litany of prior consequences. That word, the king said, as if he'd heard her flinch around it. Albino. He didn't spit it. He rinsed it. It's a description, not a sentence. What is your answer? Does it matter? The words left before she could catch them. She heard Cook inhale. The entire line of scullions go still. Something like surprise moved behind the king's face, then interest. Yes, he said. It matters. Bren, Cook said flatly, banging a lid onto a pot so hard it rang. You did this in my kitchen where I am responsible. I'm still boiling the water you'll have to bathe in before you speak to the crown, so keep your mouth shut unless you're ready to drop your teeth onto my floor. The king didn't look at Bren. The king kept looking at Kestrel as if the kitchen, the guards, the long corridor of this pack house with its chipped lintels and burned-in rules were a theater built for this one conversation. Show me your wrist, he said. Kestrel hesitated because not hesitating would have read as obedience, and obedience read as weakness here, and weakness invited demonstration. But she lifted her hand. Slow. Sure. A healer moved before the king spoke a word. A woman with a silver pin through her braid, and the clean, unapologetic hands of someone who touches hurt for a living. Majesty, she murmured. This has a pattern. Her thumb hovered above Kestrel's skin without making contact. 4 fingers, thumb on the underside. Bren, the king said then, looking away at last. Step forward. Bren didn't move, not because he thought he could refuse, but because every muscle in his body suddenly remembered what it meant to be prey. Then he stepped. 3 paces. The air between him and the king bent like heat above a road. Give me your hand, the king said. Bren lifted it. The healer did not touch either of them. She simply looked, her head tilted the way an archer tilts her head when wind shifts. The span matches, she said. Fresh contusions overlay older healing. She looked at the king. There's also residue here. Her gaze returned to Kestrel's skin, sharpening. Quiet, Barry, she said softly. In the pores. Kestrel's mouth went dry. Quiet, Barry. Derived from a plant the den mothers used in slivers to keep truly feral pups from tearing their own hides. Used by men like Bren in steeped tea to dampen a wolf's heat, to mute a howl, to smother a protest down to a whisper. Who administers her meals? The king asked. Kitchen's collective, Cook said, jaw tight. But Bren fetches the provender from the stores. He does the pouring when he's in the mood to be helpful. Bren's stare turned murderous. She's an Omega, he said, each syllable reverent with contempt. She belongs to the pack. She eats what we give her, says what we allow. It's tradition. Tradition, the king repeated, tasting the word like he could tell who D slung it in the mud and how long ago. He looked at Kestrel again. Do you wish to speak? Kestrel met his eyes because some part of her had gotten tired of watching the floorboards age under other people's boots. Wishing is expensive here, she said quietly. I don't always have change. A sound moved through the king's men, more felt than heard. Not outrage, not pity, attention. From this breath, the king said, you are under the crown's protection. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. You will answer as you wish. And if any man or woman here lays a hand on you for the words you say, I will lay a hand on them that they will not forget, while their blood still remembers how to beat. Cook exhaled so sharply it shook a curl onto her brow. Someone crossed themselves without meaning to. Bren's lips peeled back from his teeth. Kestrel swallowed. If she spoke, something would break. If she didn't, something would rot. Bren hurt me, she said, and felt the words strike the air and hang there like a bell's last note. So did Beta Merrick 3 nights ago, the strap, 10, for looking a man in the eye without having been invited. She did not look at the king now. She looked at the door to the stores, because that was where the strap lived, coiled like a sleeping thing that had learned to wake smiling. Quiet Berry is in the morning tea, not every morning, only on inspection days, so the Omega won't embarrass the pack. Silence. Then the king said to the healer, "Remove the residue, counter it." The healer nodded. "There's a paste," she said. "It tastes like the underside of a boot, but it works." She looked at Kestrel. "May I?" Kestrel's pulse beat at her wrist under the healer's poised hand. She nodded. The woman's fingers were cool and efficient. The salve stung, then cleared the fog from the edges of Kestrel's lungs, as if she had been breathing through wet cloth, and suddenly the cloth had been wrung out and hung up. The king turned away. "Where is Beta Merrick?" "Summoned," one of the guards said from the doorway. "On his way, Majesty." Kestrel had always believed fear and relief couldn't occupy the same ribcage. She had been wrong. They crowded there now, elbowing each other like brothers. "Majesty," Cook ventured, ladle held like a priest's staff. "The denlings still need their bowls." The king's mouth flickered. "Feed the pups," he said to Kestrel, not to dismiss her, but like an instruction at the heart of a larger order. "Continue living." She moved along the line, bowl by bowl, bread by bread. With every dish passed hand to hand, she said the small names she wasn't supposed to know, their reed, their pebble, their moth, their fern, and with every name the kitchen shook off another layer of its hold-breath hush. The world did not stop for kings. It did not stop for pain. It turned and asked for salt. It burned and asked for water. "Rune," the healer murmured near her shoulder as she worked. "Your wrist. Keep it cool after the paste. And if they come for you before I do, scream the king's name. Even if he's in another building, a name like his travels better than feet." Kestrel nodded. "What is his name?" she asked. Blasphemy to admit she didn't know, but the only names she was given were the ones needed to survive a day. "Orion Kane," the healer said. "Remember it." Orion. It rolled clean. A word like steel flashing in riverlight. Beta Merrick arrived with the stride of a man who learned the dimensions of a room at a glance, then decided the room would learn him instead. He wore a coat with silver buttons for show, and a mouth like a book bound shut for practicality. "Majesty," he said, bowing precisely enough to be technically uninsulting. "We would have prepared a better reception had we known you would come to our kitchens first. The dining hall?" "I prefer places where the work happens," Orion said. "Explain your Omega's injuries." He did not point at Kestrel. He did not need to. The entire kitchen pivoted around her like a compass needle around north. Merrick didn't glance. "Omega's bruise, Majesty. It's their nature to be delicate." "And Quiet Berry in her blood?" the healer asked kindly, the way a cat might inquire after a canary's day. "Calming drafts are standard for high-tension days," Merrick said. "And Omega's distress can unsettle pups. We keep order." "Order," Orion repeated, and this time he set the word down like a weight. "In my realm, order is not the rope the strong use to pull the weak into the ditch and call it balance." Merrick's jaw flexed. "With respect," he said, holding no respect in his tone at all. "We've managed our pack a long time without the Crown S hand in our kitchen. Albinos are erratic. She's a charity we indulged because it looks good on the ledger." A sound left Kestrel's throat before she could strangle it. A small, ragged thing. She turned it into cough. It was almost convincing. Orion heard it as what it was. His gaze cut to her, and softened so quickly it made her throat burn for an entirely different reason. He looked away again, before it could be read as weakness. "Bren," he said, "fetch the strap you use on my subject. Bring it to me. Bren's head snapped up. Majesty, that's not necessary. Orion didn't repeat himself. Bren went. He came back with leather coiled, buckle heavy, the end of it stained in a way that never washes fully away. Orion held out a hand. Bren placed the strap upon it with a care that was half servility, half fear of what might happen if he touched the king's skin. Orion turned the strap once, twice, the way a man evaluates the balance of a weapon and the use a room has made of it. For looking a man in the eye, he said, as if reading the inscription no one had needed to write, because it had already been burned into the air. Merrick's focus flicked quick as a needle, not to Kestrel, to Bren. A warning shot that said, "Speak only what I've taught you to say." Kestrel felt her own skin learn the shape of the room's tension. It had the crispness of a sheet pulled taut. It had the threat of a shower of knives just barely waiting for the cord to be cut. Orion set the strap on the table. Tradition is not a shield for cruelty, he said. Law is not a blade for small men to feel large. Under Crown law, no subject may be drugged without consent. Under Crown law, no Omega may be struck for existing. Under Crown law, a Beta who permits either is stripped to dust and rebuilt as something better, or he is removed. A murmur crawled the walls. Removed had two meanings here, and neither ended with Merrick keeping his silver buttons. Merrick's mouth smiled without moving. Strong words, Majesty, he said. I wonder if your advisors told you how much of the northern tithe you all lose meddling with our traditions. We give you silver from the mines, cured hides from the winter hunts, men when you call for war. If you humiliate us in our own house over a kitchen Omega, perhaps we reconsider how generous we can afford to be. Orion studied him the way men study maps when the river they need to cross is in flood. Then he turned and put his hand very gently on the top of Kestrel's head, the way a father might steady a child in a crowd. The kitchen made a sound without meaning to. My realm is made of its smallest lives, he said softly. I am not poor enough to barter one for your comfort. His hand lifted. He looked back to Merrick. You will release her to the Crown's custody until I finish my inspection. Release? Merrick laughed, head tipping back in a show of teeth. She is pack property, Majesty. You may inspect whatever you like. You may not walk out with it. Kestrel's stomach fell in a long, slow drop. This was the trap. The word property said out loud in front of a man who believed it. Orion's head tilted a fraction. Say the word again, he suggested, voice almost pleasant, so I can decide whether to forgive it or dig it out of you. Merrick's smile cracked a sliver. She was found on our land, he said, raised by our charity, fed from our stores. We invested in her training and keep. That's ledger talk, Majesty. Property talk. Then show me the ledger line where you purchased her life, Orion said. Show me the signed bill of sale from the gods. He didn't smile. No? Then she is mine before she is yours, because she is hers before she is either, and because I am king, which is a job I take to mean carrying what smaller men drop. Merrick's eyes sharpened. He looked at Kestrel in a way he had never looked at a person, like she had become a lever connected to a door he wanted closed. If you walk out with her, he said, you call challenge. Orion's gaze did not waver. Very well. The room made another of those involuntary sounds, the kind of sound people make when a cliff they thought was far away turns out to be at their heels. Hold, the healer said suddenly, sharp. Her eyes weren't on Orion or Merrick. They were on Kestrel's throat. Majesty, she said. Look. Kestrel had felt the sting there earlier, a pinch she'd written off as another bruise, another careless hand. The healer stepped close, and with the gentlest touch, folded back the edge of Kestrel's collar. Gasps stitched around the room. Under the pale skin, a thin band of black metal lay flush to her flesh, too fine to have a clasp, too dirty to have been clean work. It hummed faintly, a tone deeper than hearing, the way a storm hums in bone. Runes, cruel and small, printed its inner edge. "Silence, coil," the healer breathed. "Marek." Her voice didn't bother with titles. "You put a muzzle on a woman." Marek's hands spread in innocence, palms up. "An Omega who upset pups on a schedule. We cured the problem." Orian's face went still, in a way that would have made a wiser man pray. "Remove it," he said. Marek said nothing with his mouth. With his body, he said, "Watch my left hand." With his left hand, he said, "Nothing," and with his right, a flick that would have been pretty if it hadn't been aimed to end a life. A sliver of metal, no bigger than a tooth, winked between his fingers. Kestrel saw it and didn't know it until the healer hissed, "Pulse press." The little press found the seam of the broken coil on the floor, like it had been trained to, and depressed, once, twice. The runes in the broken half flared. The half around Kestrel's throat answered like a loyal dog too long abused. Lightning went up her spine. Her knees buckled. She caught the table with both hands, breath gone as if the room had leaned down and drunk it from her. Orian's head snapped. Marek tried to capitalize, always the accountant, but the king was already there. His boot crushed the pulse press under leather and bone. 2 of Marek's fingers went with it. Marek screamed. The guard holding the keys flinched. Ribbons fluttered, chiming softly like little flags asking which wind they should obey. "Enough," Orian said, low. The word went to ground like a stake. "Bren." Bren jerked as if he'd been struck. "Majesty?" "Stand in the doorway," Orian said without looking at him. "And if any man or woman tries to leave this kitchen without my leave, you break your tradition of cowardice and stop them." Bren's eyes darted to Marek. Marek, pale and sweating, ground out, "Obey." For the first time since Kestrel had been old enough to learn how to pour tea without spilling it, when a boot pressed her toes, Bren looked unsure which voice fed him. He drew himself to his full height. He had more of it than Kestrel had ever noticed, and went to the door. He didn't meet Kestrel's eyes. She wouldn't have known what to do with it if he had. The hush-wing door boomed open. Sable, the den mother with the wrists like braided rope, and the gaze that could split lies like firewood, came out with fury caged in both hands. Behind her, 3 Omegas blinked into the light, each with a coil snug as poison around the throat. One was barely out of girlhood. Another was older than Cook, and had a way of standing like the world had convinced her to fold, and she had told it no so many times the word had become a habit. Between them, a boy Kestrel knew, even though she had never seen him like this. Little Reed, his brown eyes wild and flooded like spring rivers. He was gagging around his coil. The runes on it pulsed slow, then quick, then slow again, like a heartbeat someone mean was tapping with a finger to make it dance for a laugh. Kestrel didn't realize she was moving until she was already there. Hands out, palms open. "Reed," she said, and the coil did something to the syllable that made it taste like she was speaking through winter glass. "Little Reed, bend to me." His eyes found her. She watched a dozen things cross his little face in one breath. Panic, hope, shame for panicking, relief for the hope. A child's forgiveness that comes without being asked and without being kept a ledger of. The healer was right behind her. "Keys," she snapped. The guard thrust the board at her. She scanned them, fingers hovering. Star blue, star blue. She pointed at Reed's coil. The ribbon matched. Kestrel wanted to rip it off with her teeth. The healer's hand blocked hers. "Gently," the healer warned. "Some of these go off if you love them too aggressively." Kestrel held Reed's small head in her palms and made her voice a place he could stand. "I'm here. I have you. When the breath comes back, don't waste it on being brave. Use it to breathe." The key turned. The coil clicked. The rune glow died like a bad promise finally exhausted. The ring opened. Reed sobbed air and immediately tried to talk with it because that's what pups do when something hurts and then stops. Sable dragged him into her arms and pressed his face to her shoulder like she could plug breath back into him through skin alone. "Shh," Sable murmured, fierce gentle. "Shh, shh, shh." 2 more. 2 more keys. 2 more clicks. 2 more air sobs. 2 more bodies learning again that breathing could be as simple as not being prevented from it. Orion still had Merrick pinned with nothing but presence. Presence can be a weapon if you make it learn. Merrick bleated, "This is pack business." And Orion said, "It is crown business when a child wears a leash." "Majesty," another guard panted, skidding in. "Outer yard. We've got a crowd. Half the pack. News ran ahead of us like a rumor with legs." "Let them watch," Orion said. "Maybe they will learn what law looks like when it remembers what it's for." Marek chose then to do the most Merrick thing Kestrel had ever seen him do. He smiled, as if he'd found the vowel that made a word a knife again. "Let them watch," he repeated. And then he shouted, not to Orion but to the outer rooms where listening would have become a sport by now. "Your king shames your house. Your king takes your property. Your king—" The king was moving before her name finished burning out of the air. Steel kissed steel with the sound of a bitten word. Orion Ao-S forearm slammed into Marek, S wrist, and drove the silvered blade past Kestrel, S throat so close it tugged a stray strand of her hair. The knife bit stone and threw sparks. Kestrel tasted copper that wasn't blood. It was the taste pain leaves behind when it lifts its head to look at you and changes its mind about biting. "Move," her mind said. Her body remembered how. Palms. Knees. Up. The coil lay broken in her hand like a shed ring from a snake too mean to molt clean. The edges had scored her skin. Fine. Pain. But owned. She shoved the snapped half into the pocket sewn inside her apron and rolled to one hip as Merrick wrenched his blade free with a daylight-bright scrape. "Circle!" Merrick barked, swinging for Orion's ribs. "Witnesses! See it! He breaks the line!" Orion didn't answer. He never seemed to, not with words if a body had offered him an arithmetic he preferred to solve with motion. He stepped through the slash, caught Merrick's knife hand, and folded it backward with a tenderness that was all technique and no mercy. The knife clanged to the floor. The kitchen took a breath, like many mouths learning the same word at once. Kestrel's pulse jogged hard against her tongue. The healer's hands were already at her neck, checking, pressing, smearing another line of that boot-tasting paste along the welt the coil had left. "Blink," the healer ordered. "Speak." Kestrel swallowed. The first sound that came out was a rasp like 2 stones rubbing together. She stopped, because the sound startled her. It was hers, unmuzzled and raw. She tried again. "I'm all right." The words felt like they should be whispered into a cupboard and locked there. She let them stand in the open air instead. "Good girl," the healer breathed, fierce as a prayer. "Keep breathing. Don't faint unless you like me slapping you." Merrick snarled. Not an animal sound, but a bureaucrat's version of one, all posture, no spine, and drove his shoulder into Orion's sternum. Orion absorbed it like a tree absorbs rain, felt, acknowledged, redirected. He turned the beta, hip to hip, and put him down so simply it looked like Merrick had declared the floor a better idea. "Majesty," a voice called from the door. A guard. "North Hall secured. We found a ledger and a key rack." "Bring the rack," Orion said without looking up. "Do not touch any key twice. If a coil is paired, the second touch tightens." The words sank through Kestrel's skin like warmth through cold fingers. He knew their traps. He knew them because someone had told him, or because he had learned them the slow way. The way that puts scars in a man as memory. Either way, it mattered. It made the room change shape. Less haunted house, more map. Merrick twisted on the stone, kicked out, caught Orion's ankle. Orion's knee dipped. Merrick rolled, grabbed the fallen knife, but Kestrel had already moved. She didn't think. Thinking in this place had always been something that happened after you watched someone else decide what to do to you. She lifted the little kitchen blade Cook had foisted into her palm and flicked her wrist the way she'd seen Cook flick fish guts off steel. The throw wasn't fancy. It wasn't even good. The knife hit Marek's hand with the flat, but it was enough. The clack shocked his fingers open. Orion's foot trapped the beta's wrist. His palm slammed the knife hilt. A twist. The blade spun into Orion's hand. He set it point down in the chalked ring between their boots like he was pinning down a snake and spoke without raising his voice. Yield. Circle law, Marek said through his teeth. She's outside it. You broke it first. I broke your blade, Orion said. Law bends to keep women breathing. Marek spat red on the chalk. You think your crown can tell a pack how to run its den? No, Orion said, and there was no triumph in it, only bone. I think my crown remembers what pack means when men forget. He shifted his weight just enough that Marek felt it. Keys. A guard shouldered in, breath tight. He held a board with 12 small hooks and 8 keys, each on a ribbon of dyed leather. Black, rust, bile green, star blue. Colors that would match coils if you had a coil that matched your ribbon. Kestrel's stomach turned. 8 meant 8 throats. Where, Orion asked, eyes on Marek, are the other 4? Marek's smile spread until Kestrel could have used it to slice bread. In use, he said, and cut his eyes toward the closed door beyond the scullery. Hushwing dormitory. Inspection day, remember? Kestrel moved before she knew she'd moved. The healer grabbed for her sleeve. Kestrel slipped it. The kitchen corridor had always felt too narrow, but now it opened like a throat when the choke is finally dislodged. Den mothers! She shouted, and the sound of her own voice at that volume was a shocking, giddy crime. Open the hushwing! Cook was already moving, ladle discarded, arms bare, scars bright. Sable! She roared. Keys to me! Orion didn't turn his head. He didn't have to. Marek, he said. One more chance. Name every coil you own. Hips and steam still making her hair curl. You point one more bolt at my pups, she said, and I salt this yard so deep no spring will ever forgive it. Sable's laugh was wild and wet. The den mothers flanked the little ones like cliffs. A dozen men Kestrel had only ever seen arguing about fence lines stepped forward and put their bodies where their opinions had never dared to stand. Helix blinked like a man who had expected fear and been handed something he couldn't read. You forget yourself, he told the yard. No, said Sable. We remember us. Orion swayed. Kestrel's feet moved without consulting pride. She reached him as his knees considered the idea of folding. Her shoulder went under his good arm. Heat poured through his coat into her bones, heat and a tremble he wasn't letting the yard see. Don't you dare fall here, she whispered fiercely. Not with your back to them. He didn't. He made straightness look like defiance again. Kestrel Rune, he said quietly, voice for her ear and not for the yard. I'm going to ask you to run in a moment. You'll hate it. You'll think it's leaving. It won't be. No, she said, and the word didn't feel like a child's refusal now. It felt like a woman naming a rule. I don't leave people bleeding on my floor. Good, he said. Then bring the floor with you. What? He squeezed her shoulder once, hard enough to put meaning in skin. Then he stepped away. He raised his voice, not to a shout, to something that made men remember what it felt like to be proud. By the king's word, Orion said, these subjects walk with me. Anyone who harms them breaks crown law. Anyone who obeys a false writ over my voice commits treason. He lifted his palm. Blood ran into his sleeve. Stand aside. For a breath, the yard hesitated. Then Helix smiled almost kindly and said, Fire. The crossbows lifted again. Kestrel S. Hart did something painful and very practical. It counted how many bodies she could put between reed and bolts, and still have enough Kestrel left to stand. She shifted her weight to do it. And that was when the gate at the far end of the yard blew inward on its hinges. The force of it was not wind. It was men with a battering beam and the kind of organized rage that wears uniforms. They poured through, crown blue, but not the king's. Gray spire sigils marked their sleeves, the council's private guard. Halix's smile grew like a stain spreading. The first of them raised a parchment and read in a voice used to making itself the only sound in a room. By order of the council, the Omega known as Kestrel Rune is to be taken into immediate custody for examination and holding. Any interference will be met with force. He lowered the page and grinned. That'll be us then. Kestrel felt the broken coil bite into her palm so hard it left its pattern. She lifted her eyes to Orion's. He met them, and in that half-breath she saw what he decided. Not surrender, not suicide. Something old, something cunning. Something that needed one more heartbeat to ripen. He opened his mouth to speak. Behind him, on the salt barrel, Cook's face went white. "Kestrel," Cook said, in a voice that didn't know how to be afraid, and was trying to learn fast. "Behind you." Kestrel turned. Bren stood very close. Too close. He had moved like a memory moving in the corner of a room while you were busy with more important fires. He held a coil in both hands, new, bright, runes fresh and oily. The ribbon was not star blue. It was crown cobalt. "I'm sorry," Bren whispered, and his eyes were wet, and his mouth knew how to lie better than his eyes ever had. "Beta said if I gave you to the warden, I'd live to see summer." He lifted the coil toward her throat. The world narrowed to the shape of that ring and the inch of air between it and her skin. She did not step back. She stepped in. Halix made his mouth a sympathetic shape. "Oh, little bird," he said, "saccharina's syrup. You don't get to decide." He flicked 2 fingers. The crossbow's string sang. Orion moved. Kestrel saw only pieces. The flare of his coat, the twist of his torso, the flash of a blade knocking one bolt off its hunger path so it chewed stone instead of Cook-S ribs. Sable ducked, dragging Reed with her. A second bolt buzzed Kestrel-S ear and buried itself in the doorframe where a smear of her hair still clung from the first, near miss. A third took Orion high in the shoulder. He did not fall. He made falling reconsider itself. He staggered 2 steps, and then turned those steps into a forward press that carried him between Halix and the men with the bows. Someone shouted. Bren, Kestrel realized distantly, because the sound was panicked and loyal to the wrong thing, but loyal still. Chaos found corners and shook dust out of them. The yard blew open like a storm cracked its back. "Inside!" Sable bellowed. "Walls!" She pushed Reed ahead of her. The healer had both hands full of keys and coils now, ribbons streaming like battle flags. "Orion," Kestrel said, and she didn't hear herself say it. She felt her mouth make the shape of his name the way a hand finds a doorknob in the dark by memory, not sight. He looked at her across a suddenly unmeasurable distance. Blood darkened his cobalt. He smiled, a real one worn thin by pain and stubbornness. And then the smile was gone because Halix was there quick with the easy evil of men who hire others to bleed for them, and therefore have enough breath left to run. "Yield," Halix said pleasantly. "Or the next bolts aim lower." Kestrel's hand found the broken coil in her pocket, the metal biting as if to say, "Remember me. Remember the cost of being quiet." She lifted it and held it in the open like a small black moon. "You want to study one?" she said, voice steady with a steadiness she had borrowed from the king 2 minutes ago and now refused to give back. "Start with this. It doesn't scream anymore when you press it. It learned a better language." Halix's eyes narrowed. "Cute," he said. "It won't matter." His finger twitched. It would have been a slaughter. It would have been footnotes and later songs and a hole in the world where a spine should be. It should have been that. It did not become that because something else moved faster than bowstrings, no sound at all until it was sound. a low, rolling thunder that swelled until it filled the yard and made banners forget their own tailoring. Wolves, Kestrel thought, except not the faces. They were men and women. But the sound had the weight of a mountain leaning. It came from the lanes, from the roofs, from the narrow runnels where people kept quiet things quiet. It came from the pack. Their pack. The ones who had watched and weighed and now, finally, tipped. Enough, said a voice that had never spoken above the clatter of pots in all the years Kestrel had known it. Cook. She had climbed the salt barrel and stood above the crowd with her hands on her hips and steam still making her hair curl. You point one more bolt at my pups, she said, and I salt this yard so deep no spring will ever forgive it. Sable's laugh was wild and wet. The den mothers flanked the little ones like cliffs. A dozen men Kestrel had only ever seen arguing about fence lines stepped forward and put their bodies where their opinions had never dared to stand. Hallex blinked like a man who had expected fear and been handed something he couldn't read. You forget yourself, he told the yard. No, said Sable. We remember us. Orion swayed. Kestrel's feet moved without consulting pride. She reached him as his knees considered the idea of folding. Her shoulder went under his good arm. Heat poured through his coat into her bones, heat and a tremble he wasn't letting the yard see. Don't you dare fall here, she whispered fiercely. Not with your back to them. He didn't. He made straightness look like defiance again. Kestrel Rune, he said quietly, voice for her ear and not for the yard. I'm going to ask you to run in a moment. You'll hate it. You'll think it's leaving. It won't be. No, she said. And the word didn't feel like a child's refusal now. It felt like a woman naming a rule. I don't leave people bleeding on my floor. Good, he said. Then bring the floor with you. What? He squeezed her shoulder once, hard enough to put meaning in skin. Then he stepped away. He raised his voice not to a shout, to something that made men remember what it felt like to be proud. By the king's word, Orion said, these subjects walk with me. Anyone who harms them breaks crown law. Anyone who obeys a false writ over my voice commits treason. He lifted his palm. Blood ran into his sleeve. Stand aside. For a breath, the yard hesitated. Then Hallex smiled almost kindly and said, Fire. The crossbows lifted again. Kestrel S. Hart did something painful and very practical. It counted how many bodies she could put between reed and bolts and still have enough Kestrel left to stand. She shifted her weight to do it. And that was when the gate at the far end of the yard blew inward on its hinges. The force of it was not wind. It was men with a battering beam and the kind of organized rage that wears uniforms. They poured through, crown blue, but not the king's. Gray spire sigils marked their sleeves, the council's private guard. Hallex's smile grew like a stain spreading. The first of them raised a parchment and read in a voice used to making itself the only sound in a room. By order of the council, the Omega known as Kestrel Rune is to be taken into immediate custody for examination and holding. Any interference will be met with force. He lowered the page and grinned. That'll be us then. Kestrel felt the broken coil bite into her palm so hard it left its pattern. She lifted her eyes to Orion's. He met them, and in that half-breath she saw what he decided. Not surrender, not suicide. Something old, something cunning, something that needed one more heartbeat to ripen. He opened his mouth to speak. Behind him, on the salt barrel, Cook's face went white. Kestrel, Cook said, in a voice that didn't know how to be afraid and was trying to learn fast. Behind you. Kestrel turned. Bren stood very close. Too close. He had moved like a memory moving in the corner of a room while you were busy with more important fires. He held a coil in both hands, new, bright, runes fresh and oily. The ribbon was not star blue. It was crown cobalt. I'm sorry, Bren whispered, and his eyes were wet. and his mouth knew how to lie better than his eyes ever had. Beta said if I gave you to the warden, I'd live to see summer. He lifted the coil toward her throat. The world narrowed to the shape of that ring and the inch of air between it and her skin. She did not step back. She stepped in. She stepped in. Bren hadn't expected forward. Men like him never do. They practice for flinches and retreats. Closing the distance unstitched his plan. The coil's cold rim kissed Kestrel's collarbone. Another inch and it would have seated. She caught both his wrists, twisted, and fed the ring down instead, not to her throat, but to the crook of his elbow. Runes met skin. The coil shivered, hungry metal finding a pulse. It closed. Bren's eyes went huge. He tried to rip it free with the opposite hand. The coil read the heat of that palm too, and snapped shut there as well, so he wore it like a bright, merciless figure 8, forearm to forearm. He yelped as it bit. "Don't," Kestrel said, and the steadiness of her own voice startled her. "You'll set it deeper." He bucked anyway. Pain taught him quicker than she could. He froze with his breath sawtoothing, arms trapped to his ribs by his own panic. The ribbon, crown cobalt, hung between his elbows like a pretty joke. Hallex laughed. "Inventive," he said. "But I brought a dozen more." He flicked 2 fingers. Greyspire guards surged, crossbows raised. Orion's voice cut the yard like a clean blade. Salt. Kestrel didn't understand until Cook moved. She ripped a sack with her knife and slung it wide. White rained. Sable seized a second sack and made an arc of it. A bright, raw crescent gouged into the dirt. 2 scullions dragged a third, hands red with the work. The ring met itself, and closed around Kestrel, Orion, the healer, Sable, Reed, and the 3 freed Omegas with a whisper like surf. Old law. She felt it like a memory she hadn't earned. By the salt we share, no blood spills within the circle from our hands. "Kitchen oath," Cook said, standing in the ring's mouth like a door. Hearthright invoked. Hallex's smile thinned. "Kitchens and their little myths," he said. "This is a yard and a writ. Fire." The first bolt lifted. It didn't fly. Men on the wall had not moved, and yet something moved them. A sound rolled the length of the stones, low, insistent. The working man's thunder again. Kestrel glanced up and saw the pack there. Not Orion's men, not Hallex's either. The ones who fixed hinges and shoed horses and hauled hides. Hands that don't usually count, counting at last. One by one they set palms out, a line of open hands facing the yard. Not weapons. Witness. The posture of people saying, "We see you." It didn't stop the next order. Hallex was too far along the road he'd chosen. "Fire," he said again, sweeter, and the sweetness was wrought. Kestrel felt Reed's small fingers fist the cloth at her hip, felt the older Omega beside her. Mina, she thought, remembering the way Mina had once given the Denlings extra slices when Beta eyes were elsewhere. Stiffen until her bones must have sung in their sockets. She reached without looking, and found Mina's hand and squeezed. "Breathe," she said. "In, out." Orion's weight tilted. The wound in his shoulder soaked his sleeve a darker blue. He swayed toward the ring's edge, as if the circle wanted to let him go, and he was too mannered to make a mess on anyone's floor. Kestrel went under his good arm again, and set him back on the white line as if setting a pot back on its trivet. "Stay," she said, and the word was the same one she used for boiling milk. Not a command, a kindness. "Rune," he murmured, and somehow there was calm in it. "Bring the floor with you." "This is the floor," she whispered back, glancing at the salt. It came. Hallex took a step and tested the circle with the heel of his boot. The leather smoked, and he snatched his foot back with a hiss, composure cracking hairline. "How quaint," he said, voice brittle. "Witchery in the scullery." "Law," Sable corrected. "Older than your paper."
Grey spire guards fanned. The angle on their bows shifted. Salt couldn't stop a quarrel in the air. Keys, the healer said softly. Eyes on the cobalt figure 8 chewing Bren. If a coil is armed in the circle, it counts as our hand if it bites. We can't use it, Majesty. We won't, Orion said. His gaze was on Halix, but when Kestrel slid her fingers along his forearm to feel for the thready stutter of his pulse, he tipped his wrist so she could find it easier. He didn't have to. He did. The space inside Kestrel's chest widened enough to hold breath and something else that wasn't to fear. Halix's patience failed itself. He lifted his hand. The captain at his shoulder sighted down a bolt. The target wasn't the king. It was Cook. Cut the hearth and the pot goes cold. Kestrel moved before the sight line kissed release. She lifted the broken coil in her palm black half-ring. Dead runes, and raised her voice. She didn't shout. She spoke the way Cook spoke when the room was too loud and the soup needed salt anyway. By hunger's law, she said. Because the words arrived and fit. By salt and bread and heat. By the hands who keep pups alive in winters you miscount I. Kestrel rune. Claim shelter under the king's hand. The yard shuddered. Not the ground. The people. Some bowed their heads. Some looked at Orion sharply, measuring what he would do. Halix barked a laugh and made a go-on-then gesture. And what does that buy you, little bird? Time, she said. A day. A night. A breath to speak the truth inside a room that remembers it. Her voice didn't shake. Old law. A subject may declare sanctuary at the king's side once in her life. If he places his signet on her skin, any arrow loosed at her in that day is treason. Any hand on her is a hand on the crown. Halix rolled his shoulders. It's adorable you collect kitchen tailies. Orion didn't look away from Halix when he answered Kestrel. Forearm, he said. Turn it. She offered her wrist. His hand blood slick. Steady lifted. He pressed the signet into her skin. It burned, not like pain, like a seal pressed into wax. A heat that said, "You're seen." When he let go, a red crescent shone above her pulse. The yard did another of those involuntary things. The pack looked from the mark to Halix and tried to decide what kind of men they were going to remember being this afternoon. Halix watched it like a gambler watches a coin launched high enough to kiss the rafters. Then he smiled without his eyes. Treason, then, he said softly. A word for brave songs. Fire. The captain loosed. The bolt came for Kestrel's heart. Orion's arm moved. Not enough. Not fast. Enough to change its poem. The quarrel ripped through the meat of his already wounded shoulder and spat itself into the salt at Kestrel's feet, quivering there like a live thing that had just discovered it was wood. Someone screamed. Kestrel didn't realize it was Bren until she saw him on his knees, coil digging deeper as he writhed. Stop, stop, he sobbed. No one was hurting him now. The coil was, and the coil didn't recognize surrender. Majesty, the healer hissed. We have to move you. We have to move all of you. Sable snapped. Kestrel, there's the Ash Run. The old tannery tunnel. It comes out by the west ravine. Cook's mouth set like a lid ceiling. It collapsed in the spring. Not all of it, Kestrel said. The map of the den running under her palms like kneaded dough. There's the smoke flue that little crawl behind the ovens. It kisses the Ash Run. If we break the oven wall, we'll lose the ovens, Cook said, and grief flashed there. Her temple. Her altar. She swallowed it. Fine. We'll build new ones if we live. She turned. Scullions, wet rags, pry bars, move. Halix watched all of this the way a man watches rain, decide whether it will be dramatic or ruinous. Enough games, he sighed, and signaled. Grey spire pressed closer. The ring of salt smoked where their boots touched it. The captain leveled for a second shot low, this time Mina. Reed made a small, soft sound like a reed in shallow water when a footstep's near. Kestrel's hand found the bolt in the salt at her feet. She lifted it and held it like a knife. The wood was warm still from flight. "You shoot again," she told the captain. "And I put this through your eye before you reload." She had never thrown anything like this. She said it like she had. Sometimes a voice makes a thing true long enough for the body to catch up. Helix's tongue found his teeth in a way that meant, "This annoys me." He signaled again, smaller. 2 men with tower shields stepped forward to make a mobile wall. A third reached for a pouch at his belt and pulled out a handful of something that glittered like ground dreams. He blew. It arced, a pretty cloud falling toward the ring. Glass salt, the healer spat. Counter oath. Where it landed, the white of Cook's salt grayed, clotted, died. A gap opened in the ring barely wider than a footstep. Helix's smile came back fully formed. "Paper," he said, "and glass." He stepped toward the gap. "Don't," Orion said. He wasn't pleading. Command stripped to bone. "Make me," Helix said lightly. Kestrel's body decided faster than her mind could write objections. She shoved Orion backward into Sable's arms and went for Helix at the gap. Not to grapple, not to scratch. Those were kitchen fights. She went to feed him something he didn't know how to chew. She still held the broken coil. Helix reached to backhand her away and hit the ring's edge with his knuckles. His skin flinched. In that breath-small, stupid, human Kestrel pushed the coil's half-moon against the thin white line of his wrist where pulse jumps. The dead runes licked him. Woke. They weren't fully dead then. They had been banked like coals. They flared. Helix jolted like a horse surprised that a meadow bites. He snatched his hand back, fury skating his face quicksilver. "Cute," he said through his teeth. "Now He didn't finish because the ring did something Kestrel had not asked for. It rose. Not by inches. Not with magic that made songs about itself. It rose in the bodies of the people who believed in it. The wall hands came down from the wall and stood on the white. Men without titles planted boots in salt. Women with flour on their arms put their shoulders to air, like they could hold a door that wasn't there yet, but would be if they leaned hard enough. The ring became a crowd that wouldn't move. "Cousin," Helix said, and at last there was strain in it. "Call your dogs off." "Not mine," Orion said softly. "Ours," he swayed. The healer swore and pressed her hand to his wound. Blood ran over her fingers in a hot rush. "Now," she said to Kestrel without looking. "Ovens. Wall, go." Kestrel nodded. "Cook," she called. "With me." They moved as one organism. Sable dragging Reed, the older Omegas who. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The bolt leaped. Kestrel stepped into its path and made the decision her body had already made for her. Pain bloomed hot under her ribs, more burn than knife. A star punching through skin, and then sulking there. She staggered, breath snapping short. The world wanted to tilt. She kept it level by keeping Reed and her sight alive, unperforated, terrified and still holding to the hawthorn like it was the last knot in a rope. "Stay down," Sable snarled, dragging the boy backwards into thorn and shadow. "Good lad hands and belly crawl," a whip cracked. One of Orion's riders, their coats dust-scarred from hard miles, snaked his braid of leather around the captain's bow and yanked it sideways, so the second shot chewed dirt instead of Kestrel's lungs. 2 more riders slammed into the grey spire line. Shields first. Not to kill. The kitchen had called hearthright. The crown observed it, but to break the neatness of their aim. Orion didn't shout orders. He bled and moved and made the space around his people easier to live inside. The healer clamped her palm to Kestrel's side without asking permission. found the bolt hole with calm fingers, and swore into Kestrel's ear in a tone that was oddly mothering. "In and out," she said. "Clean pass, lucky girl. Hold here. Hard." She pressed Kestrel's hand over the wound, then shoved her belt into Kestrel's grip. "Tight. You're not allowed to die in a kitchen story." "Not dying," Kestrel managed, though the edges of the world had acquired a crumbly quality. "Too much to do." "Good," the healer said. "Keep that arrogance. It makes decent glue." Helix's smile had finally slid off his face. He held the air like a man trying to keep hold of his part in a bad play as the set caught fire. "Seize them," he said, and when his men didn't move quickly enough, because the riders were inside their bows, because Cook was on the salt barrel again with a pan lid in each hand like a war goddess who'd run out of patience, because the pack on the walls had turned their witness palms into weapon hands, dropping ropes and stones and buckets in ways that weren't quite attacks, but made shooting a complicated hobby. He hissed, "Seize her," and pointed at Kestrel again, as if the day might simplify itself if he narrowed it to one girl's throat. "Come take me," Kestrel said, because she'd bled enough in silence to know her voice was a weapon worth the bruise. Orion found her hand, the uninjured one, and squeezed once. Quick, not to hold her in place, but to anchor the ground beneath both of them. Then he stepped forward with his sword not raised, and his head high. "Warden Helix," he said, as if they were returning to a conversation he'd been too polite to cut short earlier. "By crown law, by hearthright, by the sanctity of my signet, stand down. Your men will uncock, your captain will lower his aim, and you will dismiss the coils you brought into my realm against my subjects." Helix's laugh came back, but thinner. "And if I don't?" "Then you will be arrested," Orion said simply. "For unlawful restraint, for assault on a kitchen under salt, and for treason. You loosed an arrow at a marked sanctuary." He turned his palm so the riders could see the blood-slick signet that had burned crescent red into Kestrel's wrist. The new rider's Orion's men, late but unmistakably his, shifted. Not much. Enough to say they'd die where they were standing if asked. Enough to send a message up the spine of the day. "You are not the only one with paper, cousin. We have oaths, and while they may be less pretty to hang on a wall, they are harder to tear." Helix weighed it, the riders. The kitchen that had turned itself into a law. The coil-proof and Kestrel's palm runes humming faint gold where the glass wafer nested in the broken curve. The pack on the walls no longer quiet. He chose the coward's honor. He smiled like a friend and took a step back. "Of course," he said. "No one wishes blood. Not in a kitchen." "Lower," he said to his captain. The captain lowered. "We'll resolve this where it belongs, in chambers, with ledgers and the proper signatures." "Good," Orion said. "First signature. Your name under a statement that you ordered coils used on miners in a hushwing." Helix scared. "So dramatic. You know I can't sign that." "Then say something true," Kestrel said, because blood loss made honesty easy. "Just once. Try." For the first time, Helix looked directly at her without calculating what he would get from the looking. He didn't like what he found. "You don't understand power," he said softly. "You never will." "I understand kitchens," Kestrel said. "We make power out of water and heat and hunger. We feed it to the people who pretend they invented fire, and we keep the smallest ones alive while the large ones play at law." She held up the broken coil. The gold echo pulsed. "And I understand memory. This will not forget you." Sable had Reed under her arm now, like a sack of grain that kicked and asked inconvenient questions. Cook stood at the salt ring with her lids planted like shields, daring men to step where their boots would smoke. The older Omega's Mina and the woman whose spine had never once apologized stood inside the ring, with their chins up and their throats bare. No coils, no muzzles. The pack on the walls had begun to sing not words yet. A hum. A low, stubborn note that travelled better than a speech. Halix's eyes flicked to Bren's body in the ravine grass. A man paid in his own hand for debts he had written in others. His mouth folded. "Pick him up," he said to no one in particular, surprised to hear his voice say something human. Then he remembered himself and added, "Dry. He belongs to the ledger." "Not any more," Cook said. "He belongs to his mother." Orion didn't. He take his eyes off Halix when he said to his riders, "Secure Beta Marek. Bind his hands. He will answer for every bruise on this kitchen's skin." Marek had tried to turn himself into a shadow along the wall. Shadows don't limp, and his did. 2 riders peeled him off the stone like old paint. He spat a tooth at their boots and declared, through red, "You'll lose the mines. We'll teach them how to run without you," Orion said. "The ground doesn't need your name to hold it together. Everything should have broken there. The day, the pack, the spell of fear that kept men like Halix tall. But days rarely break where the story wants them to. They break where cunning has been laid like glass under salt. A grey spire clerk no armour, ink-stained fingers. Chin too neat for any honest fight stepped forward with a little purse and blew something glittering at the ring. Glass salt again. Cook a circle hissed and clotted, and opened a mouth just wide enough for one man to pass. The captain lunged for the gap. Not at Kestrel this time. Not at Orion. At Reed. Sable moved like a woman who had raised 100 children with 2 hands and 10 knives. She tossed Reed to Mina, catch, and met the captain with her forearm and a knee. The captain found the air where Sable had been, and earned himself a thorn in the face from the hawthorn behind her. He snarled, swiped blind, and caught Sable's cheek. Blood sprang. Sable laughed at him, not kindly. "My kitchen has scratched me worse," she said. Kestrel didn't see Halix move. She felt Orion flinch and turned as if something had pulled her by the ribs. Halix had his knife low and close. A city street trick, not a duelist's flourish. The line he drew would have opened Orion from belt to heart. If Orion hadn't stepped into it the way he stepped into everything wrong-footed. And therefore right enough. The blade glanced, cut coat not gut, and Kestrel's whole body translated the sound from cloth to skin to fury. She went at Halix with the broken coil like a woman who had learned late that her hands were for more than dishes. He backstepped, graceful because cowards train in not being where the hurt will be. The healer's voice cut through the yard. "We cannot keep this ring," she snapped at Orion. "They'll eat it with glass until it's a sieve. We move now." South Gate, through the Miller's Lane. Orion's gaze flicked the yard, the ravine, the kitchen mouth, the riders. He nodded. "Form on the cook," he ordered. "Pups and Amiga's center. Rune." His eyes found Kestrel, and did something reckless. Trusted her to do the part he described aloud. "Stay by me." They moved. The ring didn't vanish. It travelled with them, made of bodies now. Men and women stepping with their shoulders squared like doorposts shifting down a hallway. The pack on the walls came down from the walls to join it. Halix's men tried to pinch from both sides and found their fingers refused to close, because the air between them had been made stubborn by all the small lives who had decided that courage could be a crowd. Someone blew a horn, one of Halix's. The note was long and flat, and meant we are pretending this is still our plan. The riders answered it with a different note that meant nothing a horn can say: steel, leather, boot, breath. Kestrel kept her hand on Orion's belt, not because she thought he'd blow away, because some part of her was counting his breaths without meaning to. The healer ran alongside, fingers pressed to the cloth above the wound. cursing like a woman knitting a sweater she didn't have time to finish. Sable had Reed tucked on her hip now, the boy brave to the point of dangerous. "I can walk," he kept insisting. "I can walk. You can be carried," Sable said. "That's a skill too." They reached the south lane where millers dumped chaff and gossip. Halix's men had guessed this much. A knot of them stood there with shields layered and spears angled to persuade the day to narrow again. Orion didn't slow. He did the worst possible thing for men who expect the worst possible things. He handed Kestrel the broken coil and walked, unhurried, straight toward the shield knot like he was simply headed deeper into his own house. "Majesty," the captain said, voice careful, spear steady. "You don't want this." "I don't," Orion agreed, and didn't stop. "Step aside." "By writ," the captain began. "By my voice," Orion said. The distance collapsed to nothing. Kestrel didn't see the move that opened the knot. She felt it pressure changing, a held breath let out. Then the riders were pouring through the seam like river water finding the one low stone. The knot spun, broke, caught itself too late. The healer dragged Kestrel sideways, just in time to keep her from being clapped in the face by a surprised shield. She spluttered a laugh that tasted like ash and copper. Survival has a sense of humor that does not ask permission. They burst into the mill yard. All noise and chaff, and the mad bravery of people who have gotten farther than anyone thought they would. Orion's horse was there, sweat dark, ears flicking because horses hate days that sound like this. A rider dropped from its back without being asked and shoved the reins at Orion. "Mount," he said, then saw the wound and added, softer, "if you can." Orion put his weight to the stirrup and his teeth to the problem. He got one leg over. The healer bit her lip and looked at Kestrel. Kestrel put her shoulder to Orion's thigh and pushed as if the king were a sack of flour, and the sack had opinions. He settled, pale in a way that made Kestrel's ribs throb in sympathy. "Rune," he said, that dangerous quiet back in his voice. "With me." He held out his hand. She glanced at Sable. Sable's chin said go. Cook's eyes said I raised you today. Don't make it waste. Kestrel took Orion's hand and let herself be swung up behind him. The world rose. The wound in her side complained about riding. She told it the day wasn't taking notes anymore. South Gate. The riders shouted, and the knot of them folded around the kitchen party like a sleeve. Then became a spear themselves. Then a river. Then a storm. They broke the last clutch of grey spire at the gate no killing, just the kind of bruises that ring inside bones for seasons, and burst onto the road. The hills opening like lungs. Wind hit Kestrel's face. It tasted like flower dust and pine, and the first breath you get to take after you've been underwater too long. She looked back once. The packhouse yard was a tangle of men and songs and salt. The salt ring had been scuffed to mud, and then replanted by feet. The wall hands were still there. Palms open. Bren's body had been lifted, wrapped in Cook's spare apron, because honor sometimes wears cloth. Marek was on his knees with his hands bound, and the story beginning to realize it had picked the wrong main character. Hold, Orion said, and the riders did. The road narrowed to the river cut a slot between rock walls where sound ricocheted and multiplied. Halix would send men to cut them off on the bridge below. Orion's breath shortened. He'll be there. He wants her. He meant Kestrel. He needs her before she can be listened to. Then don't go to the bridge, Kestrel said. Go to the water. You'll drown, the healer said flatly. I can float, Kestrel said, and the child in her voice 7 years old, thrown into a trough by den boys and told to be a fish, or be a joke made them believe her. Orion's head tipped as if listening to a counsel only he could hear. We ford above the falls, he decided. Fast, seat deep. If you go under forward. The current will spit you up and I will haul you by your hair if I must. Romantic, Kestrel said, and heard Cook swear fondly 2 horses back. They plunged. The river was spring cold, the kind that announces the shape of every bone you own. It grabbed at Kestrel's legs and tried to make them belong to it. She belonged to the horse instead, to Orion's back, to the hand that found her knee, and kept it pressed where a knee does best work. Reed gasped behind Sable where the water reached his chest. Mina swore like a baker with a ruined loaf and kept moving. They made the far bank coughing and alive. Behind them, at the bridge, Halix's men finally arrived. Too many, too late. Angry in the way men are when their plan has been made ugly by people who didn't read the script. Orion didn't look back. He reached for Kestrel's hand instead, and without quite knowing how, her fingers were in his, and the signet's crescent warmed her wrist like a kept promise. "We ride to Grey Spire," he said, voice iron again despite the blood in it. "Not to bow. To bring this proof to the high bench while the mark still burns fresh. Warden Halix will stand where men stand who think paper is a god." "And if the bench belongs to him," Kestrel said, because she had learned enough in kitchens to know hope is a spice, not a staple, "then we will give it back to the realm," Orion said. "One law at a time, one coil at a time, one bruise at a time, until no one can call a woman property without losing something they love to hear themselves talk about. It should have ended there. The promise, the road, the river smell, a plan with a shape, that days that begin in kitchens rarely end where decent folk want them to. They ride until the reasonable light dies. They keep riding because the mark on Kestrel's wrist will cool at sundown, and treason is a word that changes costumes in the dark. Dusk found them on the long straight before the pass, the kind of road that makes men believe in ambushes even when none have been planned. Kestrel's wound had settled into a steady ache. The healer had bound it tight enough to make motion a negotiation. Reed slept against Sable's back in the saddle, mouth open, breath warm. Mina hummed something that had the shape of a lullaby and the vocabulary of a sailor. Orion leaned back the smallest fraction. "Still with me?" he asked without looking. "Still with you," she said, and didn't he add, "for as long as breath allows and the day doesn't to drag me away by the ankles." The pass throat narrowed. The world grew quiet in the way that isn't peace. Kestrel felt the scar at her neck prickle, the place the coil had chewed, memorizing her. She put her palm there without thinking. It was warm. Too warm. "Orion," she said softly. He felt it too. The mark on her wrist flashed hot so sudden she hissed. The crescent burned brighter, then flickered, then steadied at a low ember. Not cooling. Counting. "Sanctuary ends at moonrise," Orion said. "Paper remembers that part very well." He lifted his hand, signaled. The riders bunched. Cook's lids went from shields to bells in her grip. Sable roused Reed with a kiss to his hair, and awake now, little Reed. The first arrow hissed out of the rocks to their right, and buried itself in the road in front of Orion's horse so deep the shaft quivered and hummed. Men rose from behind stones like bad thoughts from behind a closed door. Not Grey Spire, at least, not clothed like it. Leathers. Masks. A sigil Kestrel didn't know painted on a breastplate. Red like old wounds, a circle with 3 cuts through it. "Bandits?" one rider spat. "No," Orion said, and in the one syllable Kestrel heard the flavor of a different temper. The kind a man uses when he recognizes an enemy he had been saving for later. Hired. The leader stepped into the road and smiled in a way that made Kestrel understand why some men never need to raise their voices. "Majesty," he said, mock pleasant. "Council sends its regards." He pointed at Kestrel with 2 fingers, lazy. "We'll take the pale one and the trinket in her hand." Kestrel closed her fist around the broken coil. The gold echo beat against her palm like a second pulse. The mark on her wrist warmed further, as if the signet were whispering, "I'm still here." For now. Orion exhaled, no drama in it, all decision. He didn't reach for his sword. He reached back and set his hand gently on Kestrel's thigh. The touch of a man reminding another person where their body ends and their courage begins. "Listen," he said, and the steadiness of him made the night tilt toward bearable. "When I ask you, you ride. If the horse throws you, run. If you can't run, throw the coil as far as you can toward dawn. My men will find it or die making sure no one uses it to right history wrong." "And you?" she asked. "I am very hard to move when I have decided not to," he said. And even hurting, even hunted, the corner of his mouth remembered how to be a little wicked. The hired knives tensed. The riders braced. The healer cinched a strap on her bag with teeth. Sable passed Reed to cook because some moments require the kind of hands that can catch boiling pans without flinching. The leader lifted his palm and began to lower it. Kestrel saw it, then small movement, wrong shape, a glimmer on the rocks above the leader's shoulder. Not weapon, not man. Something sat there and left to do a job when the dark got deep enough to be trusted. She didn't think. She grabbed Orion's wrist and yanked. "Down," she said, as the world bloomed with a light too white to be fire, and the cliff face spat a net of runes made of lightning straight for the mark on her wrist. Light hit the crescent. The signet's promise flared like a struck match nearing its last sulfur. Pain lifted. Clean and high. The coil in Kestrel's palm answered. The gold echo jumped like it had been waiting to. The air filled with sound metal and river and the endless crashing of paper trying to be law, while real law breathed hot through the chests of people who refused to be quiet. "Orion," Kestrel breathed, and her voice had no place to go in the bright except his name. He twisted, turned his bleeding shoulder into the light, so it chewed him first, and shoved her off the horse with his good hand, even as he reached for her again. They fell, into men, into dust, into the heart of a trap sprung on a road that had never intended to be anything but a way home. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.